This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. The year finally starts for real. I mean, it's like a real week, real year. Jobs report on Friday.
Lots of economic data this week. Wow.
Lots of data, but look at the dollar. Finally, we get a break from this ever stronger dollar.
Yep, absolutely. We got the DXY index off just a little bit, about 1% here today, Tom. So a pullback in the dollar. And the calls have been, hey, if the Fed's cutting rates at a slower rate than a lot of our other trading partners, I guess that's bullish for the dollar.
Do you sense a negativity out there? I saw Doug Cass out on tour. We got to get Doug Cass on. Eric, make a memo. We got to get Cass on to talk baseball, and I don't think we've had him on since Judge dropped that ball in center field.
Yep.
But there's a lot of angst out there in Mag 7, I noticed over the weekend.
Well, look at this Torsten Slock from Apollo.
What's
just in my
I
inbox. The price-to-book ratio for the S&P 500 at all-time highs. Now, I don't typically value the market overall and price to book. I do that for more the financials, but boy, that looks interesting. I mean, that kind of got my attention.
Key date, I just put it up, JPM Equity DES, Paul Sweeney. JP Morgan, January 15th, earnings.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's where we're heading.
Yep.
We think we're heading. Of course, we got special coverage of the Carter funeral. David Gura and Anne-Marie Horton leading that and all this week. But really what I'm driving towards is the earnings season, I think, will be substantial. Bloomberg surveillance across the nation. We're brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key political, economic, and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. We're thrilled to get started in 2025 with IBKR. Thank you for their support, foundational support to our conversations. We begin strong with Kathleen Bostjancic of Nationwide to talk to her just simply about the state of the American economy. Kathy, it's as plain as this. Atlanta GDP now was a 3-ish, and it's come back down quickly to a 2.5-ish. Is that the run rate of the American GDP right now?
Well, Happy New Year, Tom and Paul. So for the fourth quarter, even if it's been trimmed back a little bit to 2.5, that's still a really solid performance for the economy. In fact, it caps really 3 years of very strong economic activity. I think the bigger question is how much of that momentum continues into 2025. And there's where a lot of uncertainty. Now, our view is you still have a lot of strong tailwinds that are helping to support activity, especially the first half of this year. But then as time goes down, we look for some moderation, but still solid growth. It's not an economy that's about to collapse.
I mean, Kathy and Paul, help me out here, because you know the Colorado ski scene better than me. I got two economies. I'm hearing from people across the nation. They're flat on their back. And then they got lines at Park City and Vail that are 3 miles long of people spending $300 a day. Can you imagine a fam of four?
Yeah, oh my
lift
goodness.
ticket at
No.
Vail?
I don't know. I don't know. My father did it back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Kathy, I mean, it's two Americas, isn't it, in terms of consumption?
It is, and it seems to be getting, even more disparate between those two Americas, right? So you see the lower income households really struggling, prices still high, interest rates are high. They were given increases in their credit limits during the pandemic because their savings looked better than it was, right, from the government transfers, and now they're defaulting on that. So they were really given too much credit, went above it. The upper income, as you said, they got a powerful wealth effect. We're coming off of 2 years of 20% plus gains in the equity market, plus home prices up over 50% since pre-pandemic. So that's a powerful turbocharger to spending for those households.
Hey, Kathy, we're going to get a lot of labor market data this week. The JOLTS tomorrow, initial jobless claims Thursday, then Friday, of course, non-farm payrolls. What's your view of this U.S. labor market these days?
I think very similar to the overall economy, because that's what's driving personal income growth, and that drives consumer spending. Even though we have the disparity between, the upper income and lower income, so what we're seeing, we think, is a moderation in demand for labor. New hires are not as plentiful, but companies aren't laying off workers. So this is jobless claims, continuing claims, probably stay very low. But we see a concentration in the non-cyclical sectors of the economy. That could be sustained and still keep the economy rolling, but it's not as good as if we were seeing, broader employment gains.
So stepping back then, what does that mean for the consumer, do you think, in 2025? Will the consumer continue to be a driver of this economy?
Oh, absolutely. It is the main locomotive. If the consumer falters, then the economy does at this point. There's no help from abroad. Europe is in worse shape. They're still struggling, Germany, and China's really very, very sluggish and disappointing growth there. So it comes down to the consumer. We think the consumer pulls it in a little bit, but continues to be pretty solid, maybe a little bit less than 2% growth.
Over the weekend, I'm getting lots of productivity notes. Productivity's better. We're doing better. Is productivity assisting abroad America, or only the haves stuck in the Vail ski line? I mean, give us an update on Nationwide's productivity from productive Ohio.
Well, productivity is a big focus for all companies. And it is picking up, Tom. And part of what we're wondering, is this just a cyclical pickup because growth has been so strong, or is it going to be sustained? I think probably a little bit of both. Some of it's cyclical, but some of it will be sustained. Certainly AI and other factors at play. Does it benefit the workers broad-based? Well, time will tell, but we have seen some pretty good wage growth, right, over the last couple of years. Wage growth at 4%, we'll get that data, average hourly earnings on Friday. 4% before was worrisome, right? It wasn't consistent with 2% inflation. It is if productivity growth stays strong. And then everybody, hopefully corporations and workers, share in the productivity gains.
Kathy, thank you for getting us started here on this busy first week, 2025. Kathleen Bashjancic is with Nationwide. This is just out, Paul, across the tape. Come on, we got Ives later. It's 7:03 on the Bloomberg, and they come out quick. I mean, Honey's killing it. Uber added to Wedbush Best Ideas list. That's 3 minutes after Uber's accelerated buyback pack announces $1.5 billion accelerated share repurchase.
Nice.
Accelerated share buyback. I mean, you think is it because of what Ives is wearing? I mean, is that?
It could be. I mean, the stock's up 4%, Tom. I mean, here's a company. I'm just looking at the FA function, Tom, on the Bloomberg terminal. Uber's forecasted to have, by Wall Street analysts, $6 billion in free cash flow in 2024, $8 billion of free cash flow in 2025, and $10 billion of free cash flow in 2026. So they got the cash lying around, I guess.
Do they have competition? Is Lyft ebbing away? I saw one zeitgeist thing this weekend. Apple or somebody would buy Lyft. I mean, maybe. Charles Schwab would.
It's just amazing how they've diverged, right, Tom? I mean, Uber's become this monster company, $100 billion market cap, and Lyft has just kind of sat there and just missed it. And I didn't see that divergence happening.
We welcome all of you across the nation. Your commute this morning, drive safe. Some of it's really serious. We're making jokes about, but I'm sorry, that ice and that black ice, this is west of Washington out to Kansas, I guess, is really, really dangerous. Be careful out there. Right now, from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And the U.S. stock set for a second day of gains after ending the longest losing streak since April on Friday. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, 205 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 140 points. S&P futures up 0.6%, or 41 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.26%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.59%, and that is little change. The yield on the 30-year Treasury climbed to the highest level since November of 2023. We're now the 30-year at 4.81%, and that is little change. More eco data this week, including the monthly jobs report, also minutes from the Fed that investors will be keeping an eye on. Chip stocks, they're rallying. Strong earnings from Taiwan's Foxconn, that's a key assembler of NVIDIA, Apple products. Foxconn up nearly 1%. Then Nvidia's stock rose after Foxconn results. They're up more than 2%. Checking with shares of other semiconductor companies, rounding it out with Advanced Micro Devices up nearly 3%, Micron Technology up about 4%, and Broadcom up nearly 2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Oh yeah, the Detroit Lions blew
15-2. Holy
Did you
cow.
notice that?
Wow.
Bark came in today.
I know.
What a trooper.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
he had like 2 hours sleep.
Yep, exactly.
We say good morning to all of you. Good morning on YouTube. A gentleman came up to me. I was having a bowl of onion soup. You know, I miss Paris. So
Yep.
I'm having a bowl. You know, it's a cold day
Yep.
out and all that. And gentleman came up. He's
burgundy
very,
maybe?
very kind. Works on Global Wall Street. And he said they don't understand the YouTube thing. All the kids at his shop are watching YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
That's
blown
where it's
away.
at. That's where it's at.
Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. We are just dazzled by the growth. We look for a strong 2025. Thank you, Google, for all you're doing. Ray YouTube, thank you so much for helping there. And part of it is a reach of Charles Schwab. We are thrilled with us this morning. Kathy Jones joins us to give a first look at yield. I look at total return on bond funds since the bond market broke 3 years ago, whatever now, 2.5 years ago, and it ain't working. What's the value proposition in bonds versus buying the Paul Sweeney 2-year yield forever?
Yeah, well, we did have positive returns last year in bonds.
Nice.
If you look at,
you got to do better than that.
Yeah, I know. But we did. The ag was up in most categories, except for very long-term bonds or international bonds had positive returns. And you know, the reason you buy bonds are for income, and right now they have income.
Yeah.
You buy them for capital preservation. Because barring
You
a
want to
default,
get your money back.
you can get your money back, and for that sort of certainty, right, and for diversification. So at some point sometime in the future, the stock market might go down, and generally bonds do pretty well in that environment.
Kathy, for a long time we had an inverted yield curve, and some folks like Cam Harvey at Duke University would tell you that means a recession's coming. We didn't get it. Now we've got the yield curve steepening. I got the 10-year at 4.60, the 2-year at 4.25. What is that steepening yield curve telling us?
Yeah, this was one for the record books. We didn't get the recession after the inverted yield curve. I think it's telling us two things. It's telling us, yes, the market still looks for the Fed to cut a couple of times at the short end, but the long end is reflecting all of the risks that we have for inflation and for policy that may prove to be inflationary down the road. So we're going back to a more normal, steeper yield curve, and I think that continues.
So what am I doing in terms of credit here? Do I take credit risk here, or do I just be comfortable in my treasury market?
Yeah, I think you can take some credit risk. We're cautious on overdoing it on credit, going too far down the spectrum, because we are starting to see defaults rise in the high yield market and the lower credit quality part of the market. But investment grade companies, you know, they have cash flow, they have strong earnings.
Right.
It's really hard to fight that. So we'd continue with the investment grade and, you know, in the intermediate duration category.
The real yield, what does that indicate to you? The nominal yield, folks, I think it's, Paul, it's the beginning of the year. Like every jargon we use, we got to redefine it.
Right.
Even if it slows the show down to a Lisa Mateo crawl. We don't want to do that. But the real yield is the inflation-adjusted yield. There's different ways to measure it, but the answer is it's up and away. Does that impinge on Liz Ann Saunders' economy?
Well, I think at some stage of the game, other asset classes may look at the positive real yield of, say, 2.5%, maybe moving up to 3%.
Really? Are you? Well, we got to make some news here. Come on. Are you? Can I put that out on YouTube? Kathy Jones models 3% 10-year real yield.
I don't think that it's out of the question at all. If you get a 5% 10-year, which is within the range of potential outcomes that we have, and inflation continues to drift lower, you're going to get very close to that 3% real yield. And I would think at some point other asset classes would pay attention to that and say it's competition. But in terms of the economy, I noticed Kathy Chantic. I always have trouble with her name, but I listen to her very carefully.
All right, we got to take a poll here right now. Lisa Mateo, do you have trouble with Kathy Bastiancic's name?
Bastian.
Nailed it. Paul Sweeney, do you have trouble with Kathy
I do, and I just
Bastiancic's
say,
name?
hey, friend. Welcome to the program.
I think she's a terrific economist.
She's like killer economist.
know.
I'm sitting there butchering. Mark Crumpton keeps a list of all the names. Thank God I can pronounce Jones. But Mark Crumpton keeps a list of all the names I butchered. And at the top of the list is Kathleen Machado. Good morning, Kathy at Nationwide. Tell us about Kathy's analysis.
Well, she talked about productivity. So we can have high real yields if we have strong productivity. And that's a question mark. Does that continue or not?
What does our Federal Reserve do over the next couple of meetings here? Because now, I mean, we kind of started thinking 6-9 months ago it could be multiple rate cuts. Now the market's down to maybe 1 or 2. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're very cautious from here. They have to be. We'll get the minutes later this week of the December meeting, which should be very interesting. But they have to be very cautious because there's so much policy uncertainty on the horizon, and the economy continues to do better than they thought.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Liz Ann wouldn't have done this. I mean, she's the cold. She's like, no way.
Yeah, she's down in Florida.
She's
Good for her. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wait. Liz Ann's smart. The rest of us not. That's all there is. Kathy Jones, thank you so much for getting us started. We've got more breaking news here in this. And Paul, I talked to Richard Haas about this Sunday. Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel, they file lawsuits on deal interference.
Yeah.
Ambassador Haas was brutal out on Twitter.
Yeah, this has gotten, I mean, obviously, almost from the get-go, it got very political very quickly. You think about a company as iconic as U.S. Steel, and then to have a Japanese company buy it. But even though Japan is our ally, how comfortable do you feel about that?
So the president had a bunch of heavyweights, including Chair Yellen, in the office.
Yeah.
And they're all saying, let the deal go through. And he, of course, supported the union vote and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's, there's two sides to this story here, and I'm not sure how it's going to play out. But they're Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel file lawsuits on deal, quote, interference.
One of the reasons to stay with us across 2025 is, I tell Matt Winkler, he invented Twitter. The headline service of the Bloomberg Professional Service is really world class. And of course, we'll bring that to you across the nation on your commute and on YouTube as well. One of our other advantages is the news from New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, winter weather alerts stretch from the plains to the East Coast. Washington, D.C. is in the storm's path. In Missouri, there are blizzard warnings. Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas.
When you get these sub-zero temperatures, at least sub-zero wind chills, we know that it can have a negative impact not just on our workforce, but also our residents. And so we're making sure we address all of those issues.
The storm is expected to reach the mid-Atlantic states today. Hamas has named 34 hostages, some of them believed to have died in captivity, who it says it would return to Israel in the first phase of an evolving, if still elusive, ceasefire in Gaza. The Palestinian militant group circulated the list to Bloomberg and other media outlets after Israel sent envoys to Qatar for fresh talks for a pause in the devastating war. In New York City, many drivers will be commuting to their first day of work after the holidays with an added charge into their drive. Congestion pricing got the green light after several attempts to block the plan. Janno Lieber is New York City's MTA CEO.
1,400 cameras, over 110 detection points, separate detection points on the borders of the congestion zone, and within the zones there are well over 800 signs.
By the way, MTA Chief Janno Lieber will be on Bloomberg at 8:40 a.m. Wall Street time. Some were celebrating the plan over the weekend. Others said it was a sad day for the working class in the city. These subway riders reacted to the tolls.
I heard the chairman of the MTA said the point is like trying to make people make use of the subway. I think it's a great idea, for real.
It'll be way more people in the trains, especially that the congestion prices are going up.
It will impact all drivers across the city entering below 60th Street in Manhattan. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Tom Paul.
Okay, we got to do it. I talked to Barr's agent. You came in today. Okay, Sonic and Knuckles. And I'm sorry, it's really sort of cool. Is it old school football when they had two runners that dominant, like the Lions have two runners?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, and
there's no other team like this, right?
This win, which was, and let's be honest, yes, they dominated the Vikings, and Jared Goff wasn't the sharpest, and they just dominated them still. There were several times when the Vikings were first in goal twice.
3 or 4.
And they only generated 3 points.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to face them.
But how do the people in Detroit, are they all in? Do they feel confident that you guys can go all the way, or they kind of have this bubble's got to burst?
See, that now this is the Detroit attitude. A lot of us are all in, but we also know the Detroit Lions.
Right.
And I hate to sound like that, but it's like I'm scared because they're good.
Have no clue. Compared to Boston, Detroit's
man.
like, people, the younger people in Boston are like Celtics, Bruins, forget about it. Fourth place in my childhood was a big deal.
Yeah. No, I get it.
It was painful.
By the way, speaking of Boston, the New England Patriots, they fired Gerard Mayo after only one season because it was like a 4-13 season that they had.
I don't know what they're doing up there. I mean, that was like 2 hours after the game ended. So I don't know. But
there was a photo of the stadium. It looked like the Ted Lasso opening. Exactly. Seriously.
Yeah.
But they're going to go after this Vrabel guy.
I think they're going to hook him.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So.
Okay. Michael Barth, thank you for coming in today. On behalf of Lisa Mateo, our interns, thank you so much for. Did you get any sleep at all?
I got one eye open so you can see what happened.
Okay. Michael Barth, thank you so much. Again, this 2025 across the nation on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. In Boston, 92.9. In New York City, a congested New York City. Bloomberg 11
sailed right in this morning.
Huge.
Sailed right in this morning.
People said they had an effect yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't buy it, but that's what they said.
I know. Again, we just ripped right into the
Janno Lieber with us in the 8 o'clock hour.
Yep.
We'll be for a lengthy interview. We're going to speak to him. Paul's got questions lined up. Do we have to medicate Tucker?
Yeah.
I don't think Tucker's going to.
No, he's not going to be.
He's not going to take
involved
part
in this.
We'll have to see as well. We look at equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, dollar pausing here on the recent dollar surge, although yen 157.17. Critically for global Wall Street, renminbi with a jump condition 2 days in a row, and we're out to 7.32 yuan. I know that's Greek to you, but guess what, folks? For global Wall Street, weaker Chinese currency is a huge, huge deal. Futures up 41, Dow futures up 130, NASDAQ up a stick right now, 1%, and the VIX 16.52. From New York City, again, across the nation and on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got tech stocks leading the equity gains this morning. A big part of that, Microsoft. It unveiled a spending plan, showed sustained demand for artificial intelligence. It plans to spend $80 billion on data centers. We have Microsoft shares up nearly 1%. NASDAQ futures leading the charge, up 1%. 214 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 148 points. And S&P futures up 0.7%, or 43 points. The two-year yield, 2.56%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.59%, and that is little change. Over to commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,642 an ounce. Meanwhile, Goldman says it no longer sees gold reaching $3,000 an ounce by the end of the year, pushing their forecast to mid-2026. We'll head over to oil. Brent crude, $76 a barrel, up about 0.5%. WTI crude, $74 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.7%. Few companies making news. Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel filed lawsuits on deal, quote, interference. That's what they're calling it. U.S. Steel up more than 3%. And then sources say Paychex in advanced talks to acquire Paycor. That's a smaller rival in payroll processing. Yet Paycor shares up 21%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Ed Ludlow, I believe it's tomorrow. Help me out here in conversation with the head of NVIDIA, Paul.
I know.
I mean, that's like actually an important interview.
It is. CES starts tomorrow out in Las
Have
Vegas.
you been?
I have.
I've never been.
It's fantastic.
I mean,
it's fantastic for the first 1 or 2 or 3 times. Then you're like, it's just overwhelming. It's so big.
It's like ginormous.
It's ginormous, and you can't get a cab, and you can wait in lines and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that starts tomorrow, and that's huge. And of course, it's all about AI.
In your show tomorrow.
Yes.
The Alex Steele Hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we got Ed Ludlow coming off the sidelines to interview the.
And we got Dan Ives to do. It'll be our first
Yep.
question to Mr. Ives this morning. He's scheduled to be with us on Apple and the rest, and we'll beat him to death on NVIDIA as well. Okay. 1.2 million domestic gross. International, I don't think there's any zeros. It's 5,576. And the answer is The Brutalist, which has basically not been released in America,
I don't even know what.
won the Golden Globes. Would you explain to me what in God's name is going on?
No idea. Absolutely no idea. So, I mean, but that's what happens for these.
Wicked didn't win.
No, I mean, it's for the artist community. It's for the the reviewer community. It's not box office. It's not what people actually go and see.
I love Demi Moore. She finally won.
What did she win?
Demi Moore.
She's in The
Substance. No, The Substance. It's a different one.
Oh, okay.
So she had this incredible speech where she talked about it and just how long it took her, over 45 years, to finally get recognized by something like that. So
well, good
I
for
thought
her.
that was a
I'm
big
a big
standout.
Demi. It's Demi.
Demi. Yes,
Moore.
Demi
I'm
Moore.
a big fan. Yeah. All right. Good for her.
Who was she married to?
Well, she was married to
she
Ashton Kutcher. Was married to Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
I am so out of touch.
You're so behind.
I am so behind, which means the only one I can talk to is Henrietta Treys, who's more behind than me. Joining us now, huge value add last year to us at Bloomberg Surveillance. Henrietta Treys joins us from Veda Partners. Henrietta, I'm sort of surprised how less visible the president-elect has been the last 10 days. Should I be surprised?
I don't know. I don't feel that way. So I'm surprised to hear you say that. I feel like he's been very visible, at least in terms of having an impact on what House members are thinking, the strategy behind a reconciliation bill, of course, comments about tariffs, the nominations, but maybe I'm too deep in it to be where you are.
What are you following? Help our audience with the Henrietta Treys item this week.
The most important thing is understanding the Republican strategy around 1 or 2 reconciliation bills. Timing for bond vigilantes about when we're going to get a first budget vote that will authorize a deficit increase that I anticipate will be at least $2.5 trillion in this one big reconciliation bill. Yeah. Timing around the deadline is really important. And then, of course, all the executive orders and most importantly, the tariffs that he will announce upon taking office.
Greg Valliere was brilliant on this morning with AGF. He just said he agrees with Henrietta. So, this is the item.
So Henrietta, when we think about this reconciliation bill, talking about a generational investment in border, immigration, and military spending, it doesn't matter the party. They're always spending. It's just on different things, it seems like. So Is concern about the deficits, is concern about the debt ceiling, is that not just out the window for both parties?
Absolutely. I think that there will be substantial deficit spending in the next year, and that's going to come with $200 billion in military spending. And I would say that is on top of the billions of dollars that Democrats increased military spending under 1% hike in the National Defense Authorization Act late last year in December under a Democratic president. I mean, the spending just has no real break on it. And so I think from military spending of $200 billion plus the tax bill, which is $4.6 trillion, $1.5 trillion debt ceiling increase, a $1.7 trillion government funding bill, et cetera. We're spending without any breaks.
Does President-elect Trump, does he have the support in Congress to get all this stuff done?
I think right now we're at something of a high watermark in terms of party unity and enthusiasm and uniting behind Donald Trump. He's not president yet. And one thing to remember is that senators are very jealous and guard their power aggressively. So each one of the 53 Senate Republicans are going to have a voice in what this tax bill looks like. There's going to be 220 House Republicans, all of whom now, with a one-vote majority, are in a position to sink or swim this bill. And so whether that's the SALT caucus, which is 18 members, whether it's the roughly 30 members who support the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, these guys all very closely guard power.
Henrietta, I need to do a surveillance correction. The SALT caucus is 19 members, including John Tucker of Bloomberg surveillance. Henrietta, if we don't get the tax bill the president-elect envisions, what do we get? Some pared back monstrosity, or they just rubber stamp what's already occurred?
I think the worst case scenario, when I talk to Senate Republican staff and Finance Committee staff, the worst case scenario is a one-year extension of everything. That would be something that more closely resembles what we saw in 2010. You'll recall that the Bush tax cuts at the time were expiring, and there was a deal negotiated by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, and then Vice President Joe Biden to extend the 0103 tax cuts for 2 years into 2012. That's sort of the blueprint for the default worst case scenario. And when I hear staff talk about it, they say, maybe we just do it for 1 year. That's going to happen in December, right before Christmas. If everything goes pear-shaped. Otherwise, they're going to try to do it for at least 4 years. But more recently, Trump's talking about permanent. Members of the House Republican Conference are talking about permanent. That's 10 years. That's $4.6 trillion.
Right. I've been reading a book on polarization in Washington. I'm not going to take time now to explain it. But the answer is there was Newt Gingrich in 1994, and then I think there was Tea Party. Is there a new Tea Party coalescing right now?
There is a Tea Party that exists. You saw them vote last month. There were 30 members of them on the House Republican Conference side. But the issue that they have is really in things that they've perpetually been a problem since the 2011 Tea Party, for example. It's the debt ceiling. So when they talk about incorporating the debt ceiling into one massive reconciliation bill, that's a huge red flag for me, because there are a number of members of the Republican Conference who have never voted to increase the debt ceiling and would prefer not to. So just including that provision in a broader reconciliation bill is a real looming issue that we need to be aware of. I think it's really telling that Jason Smith, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who is the most powerful guy in the House for this tax bill, is telling President-elect Trump that he has to have the border security provision with him as a sweetener for this tax bill, because the tax bill is going to be so contentious. And I think that's a marked difference from what Senate Majority Leader Thune would like to see, and that portends real problems this year.
Henrietta, 30 seconds, executive orders. What can we expect in the first day, week, month?
Sure. A lot of this are going to focus on border, authorizing spending on the border wall, for example. I'm also expecting a bunch of red meat for conservatives, things like banning transgender youth in sports, but components around how you treat healthcare providers on abortion. And then I do expect the most important pieces, which aren't technically executive orders, but come from the executive branch, around tariffs. Right now, there's this idea that he's only going to put tariffs on critical minerals. That's just one line item of what you can do under tariff authority. It's not the same as anticipating that there will not be additional tariffs. You have Section 301, Section 232, IEPA. This is just one line item. So I think any optimism in the markets right now is just underappreciating how law works.
Henrietta Trey's, thank you so much. Every time she's on, I learn about a politician. Jason Smith, Missouri, and I didn't know this. Jason Smith is Vet Bill's favorite politician.
Really?
He's from a dog breeder family.
Dog breeder family.
Yeah, and they do like legislation on dog safety. And that Vet Bill was wearing a campaign badge. On his collar, and Jason Smith. We got to get to know that name. The 8th District of Missouri. And chairman of the House Ways and Means.
That's a big job.
Committee.
It is.
Yeah. I'm learning every time Henrietta Trace is on. It's like a clinic.
I know.
Good morning, Henrietta Trace, and thank you so much for joining. Futures advance up 43. NASDAQ up a stick, 1%. The VIX 16.47. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, you have to stay with us. A lot of good guests. Dan Ives coming up. Janno Lieber as well. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures pointing to a higher open after stock snapped a 5-day losing streak on Friday. Now, a new MLive poll survey, it says U.S. stocks, the dollar, they'll be the biggest beneficiaries of American economic growth, set to be boosted by President-elect Donald Trump's policies. Check it out. Head to MLIV on the terminal to find out more about that. We go to NASDAQ futures up 0.9%, 211 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 156 points. S&P futures up 0.7%, 44 points. The 2-year yield at 4.25%, down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.58%, and that's down 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.8%. Also have to point out the loonie on the rise. The Globe and the Mail reporting that Justin Trudeau expected to announce his resignation as the head of Canada's Liberal Party as early as today. Few companies making news. UPS building a healthcare empire to offset its stagnating revenue of the package delivery business. It has a goal to double its $10 billion healthcare revenue by 2026. And sources say Italy in talks with SpaceX over a more than $1.5 billion deal to provide encrypted telecoms. And finally, Bloomberg reporting Disney and Fubo TV could be nearing a deal to combine their on-live TV business. Well, stay tuned for that. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciated. We're doing another thing this year. The depth of talent at Bloomberg is overwhelming. You have to live it to appreciate, on a global basis, knowledge that we have. And at the back end of the hour, we're really going to emphasize people like Kriti Gupta. The Canadian story is so important this morning to America that we thought we'd get her on earlier. And with us, do we have a friend with us, Kriti? For those of you on radio, what's the name of the beast, Kriti?
We've got a friend. His name's Harvey. His middle name is George Clooney. His last name's Gupta, like mine.
I could see it, yeah. Yeah, that's very good. Just be sure the rabies shot was had. Okay. Kriti, thank you so much for showing us Harvey. Let's talk here about Canada. I thought Charlemagne the Economist did just a phenomenal job this weekend of the elegance of Canada with Quebec. Boy, the Paris and France will love that. And also Canada is a Commonwealth nation for King Charles III. Boy, Britain will love that. What's the ability of Canada in the Trudeau mess to join the EU?
I don't know if it'll join the EU. I think there's an ocean getting in the way, admittedly. But it's a lot of the same issues, frankly, to your point, that you're seeing in France and Germany, even here in the UK. I mean, yes, an ocean separates Canada from the headquarters, if you will, of the Commonwealth. But it's a lot of the same issues. And I think that's kind of Justin Trudeau's problem here. You're talking about an anti-immigration stance. You're talking about tariffs at the whim of Donald Trump and in just a couple of days he becomes inaugurated. And now you're talking about the approach on how to deal with those potential tariffs. That seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to the internal politics of Canada.
Right. Now, the news here, Critty, which you're more up to speed on than I, is the Globe and Mail in Toronto is suggesting a resignation by the Prime Minister this week. Is that true?
I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it's certainly making the rounds. And this is, of course, coming, by the way, in the context of another resignation. Chrystia Freeland, who was the finance minister, basically, of Justin Trudeau, just resigned over, again, the approach towards tariffs and what that actually includes. And we know that Justin Trudeau has been taking kind of some flack from both the left and the right constituents of Canadian politics as well. That centrist playbook isn't working. And Tom, it's something we do right here in Europe.
And he's been doing this, I think, Paul, for 12 years.
Yeah, he's been,
you know, could you imagine an American president for 12 years?
Exactly.
I don't, you know.
Hey, Critty, over here in the U.S., this Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel thing is kind of getting a lot of play. You know, now we've got the Nippon and U.S. Steel saying that they are going to sue to kind of block any interference there. What's the feeling over there in European markets? Are people paying any attention to this?
Well, I certainly am, trying to get everyone else to as well. And this is such a great case study of what I think you're going to see with a lot of different companies here. This idea that you are now trying to basically, in this America First agenda, trying to navigate what investment in the United States actually looks like. And I think for a lot of the global audience, when people looked at Nippon Steel and this kind of acquisition bid that was going to rescue the country, or the company, by the way, that was the first billion-dollar company in the world. They funded and helped supply the steel in the war effort in Europe. They built the skyscrapers, the bridges of the United States. It was a no-brainer that Nippon Steel would come in and kind of infuse some cash into a company that needed it. A Japanese company was never on the kind of America First enemies list. And that's kind of the comparisons that are now being made. It brings up a question that Janet Yellen, by the way, herself raised, according to reports in the Washington Post, of what that means in terms of foreign direct investment into the United States. And now everyone has to think that way.
And now, folks, we did not have Critty Gupta on for Canada or for Nippon Steel. Critty, you're one of the only 7 people on the planet that have enjoyed New York City congestion and also the uncongested streets of London. You've lived it. Do you think, Critty Gupta, that a congestion tax can get it done for Janno Lieber in New York City?
I mean, I kind of wish that the taxis were a little bit more efficient. That would be more my wish. If you're going to have a congestion tax, then you should be able to get a taxi and pay a fair amount to get to the airport or get downtown in a jiffy. And we're not quite there yet. So I kind of feel like there'll be some pushback on that and maybe a little less traffic to New York. This might just be a little bit of a shot in the foot. We'll see.
Thanks so much. Carvey and Critty, thank you so much. Critty Gupta with us from London today on those topics. Look for her early in the New York morning. It's like disgusting. It's like 3 a.m.
Yeah, but it's
2 a.m. our time.
Yeah, she's over in London. She's
Only
fine.
Barr sees that.
No,
I mean, nobody else is watching except Michael Barr. We say good morning. Futures up 46. A VIX 16.43. Sweeney glued to the 2-year. I mean, Paul, you pull the trigger at 4.25%.
It feels like it. Why not? I mean, this is the U.S. government. I think they're going to pay me back.
Did you see Chinese yields today?
Yeah.
They went down even further.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but nevertheless, the trend is
real
still
concern out there about
in
China.
place there.
Continue.
We say good morning to all of you. Marty, thank you so much for emailing in. Marty says good morning on YouTube as well. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. A massive winter storm system set to slam the East Coast today after blowing through the Great Plains over the weekend. Cincinnati slammed by record snowfall, stranding vehicles for more than 7 hours after a cluster of semis got stuck in the snow. In Kansas, officials are advising against non-emergency travel and urging residents to stay home. New York City is expecting a dusting today, but snow is piling up in Washington, D.C., shutting down federal offices and schools It comes as the nation's capital is bracing for a number of high-security events this week. Metropolitan Police Department Chief Pamela Smith says they don't expect protection to be impacted by the weather.
We will support the federal government in all of their efforts.
Events include the funeral for former President Jimmy Carter and the election certification at the U.S. Capitol. It is the first full workday where the New York City congestion pricing program takes effect. We get the story from Bloomberg's John Tucker.
1,400 cameras and Easy Pass detectors on gantries across the city were activated over the weekend. For drivers, this woman's reaction was typical.
I am extremely disturbed by congestion pricing because it adds more to my already tight budget.
MTA Chairman Janno Lieber and his team were celebrating.
We're doing something that's about cleaner air and safer streets and less traffic and better transit.
Passenger cars with an Easy Pass will pay $9 once a day to enter the tolled area below 60th Street in Manhattan during peak hours. The MTA will use the revenue to extend the 2nd Avenue subway to Harlem, modernize train signals, and make more stations accessible. The debut of this first-in-the-nation congestion pricing follows years of political bickering and scores of legal challenges, some of which are still ongoing. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
And MTA Chief Janno Lieber will be on Bloomberg at 8:40 a.m. Wall Street time. Finally, at the Golden Globes last night, The Brutalist won for Best Drama. Amelia Perez won for Best Musical or Comedy. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Good morning across the nation. This has really riveted the city here. Good morning on Bloomberg 1130, the tri-state area as well. Marty emails in. He watches YouTube. He watches YouTube in his car. I don't know how he does that.
Ooh.
Marty emails in and says nobody looks at their Easy Pass bill.
So true. No, I mean, it just clicks off in your credit card. I mean, I go zipping up and down the Parkway.
Am I right? 16 days times 9 is $144.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're going to have $144. Paul,
Boom.
you say nobody looks at it's like the Apple thing you get.
Exactly.
Really, nobody looks.
But you're going to see it, though. I mean, that's going to be a big number for people that, need to come in for whatever reason, need to drive into the city every day. Like small business owners, I don't know. It's going to be tough.
We'll have to see.
It's a tax.
From New York City, stay with us. Dan Ives coming up later. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We got futures on the rise this first full trading week of 2025. NASDAQ futures leading the charge up more than 1%, 227 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 171 points. And S&P futures up 0.7%, 47 points. The two-year yield, 4.25%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.58%, and that's down 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.7%. And we have Bitcoin up 0.7% at just over 99,000. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front page is the Lisa Mateo Moment, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/arrange. around the clock. Lisa, what do you have?
Okay, this is a new Wall Street Journal analysis of test scores. This is really interesting. It shows girls have lost ground in reading, math, and science, and people are really concerned about it. This is since 2019. Test scores have dropped sharply. They're calling that the pandemic learning loss. Boys' scores have also dropped, but the girls' decline is worse. So the reason why they're saying it is because a rise in behavior patterns during the pandemic, it forced teachers to pay more attention to the boys because they tended to act out more in class. And then during and after the pandemic, a lot of the girls took on those caregiving household responsibilities, so it took their focus away from school. So I just thought it was a pretty interesting.
I mean, it's going to be years.
Yeah.
Years.
That
yes.
Sure.
That we learn what the real impact is going to be.
I got this wrong, and I learned about this from Bloomberg employees. The anecdotal evidence of our 21,000 employees, I learned the pandemic and our children's education just changed. That's all there is to it. What else do you have?
I can totally see it. The gambling industry is using a lot of artificial intelligence to get more money from Americans. So some of the ways they're doing it, startups, they're profiling gamblers. So they're feeding them content, games personalized to what they like, convincing them to stay longer, make bigger bets. They're using these large language models to generate a lot of things, automated summaries. And then even you get to the physical casinos using AI because they're using machine learning to optimize where they place the slot machines, because even that kind of matters.
It does. I mean, you're walking in and out of a casino floor, slot machines. For every ingress and egress, I learned that from doing casino investing.
What do you think AI will do to this surge in NFL football, which is a surge in betting?
Yeah.
I mean, they got to be using it to learn every single thing you need to do to win money on the Patriots because you knew they were going to beat the Bills.
Yep. And one tangible, practical implementation of AI is advertising, because they can figure out, better target who you are and what you want and what ads will work for you. That's happening today from Google and Facebook.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Great to have that for us here. The newspapers with Lisa Mateo. We'll do much more of this into the week and into today as well. We haven't talked about the elephant in the room, which is there's a lot of gloom out there. 5-6 days in a row down. Go to cash. Get out. It's over. There's a lot of that out there, I think, Paul.
Well,
there's a lot of zeitgeist saying it's done.
I think there's been a little bit of, hey, we've had 2 ripping years in the stock markets.
Yeah.
Let's take a pause here. We haven't had a 10% pullback in 2024 at all. Had a 1.8% pullback there back in the summer. So maybe this market's due, and you can look at valuation, you can look at all the usual aspects. Plus, the Fed may not be cutting as aggressively as we thought. Maybe that's another reason to take a pause.
But the problem is, I haven't done this. The conversation we're having, did we have it 365 days ago?
Exactly.
And I think we did.
Yeah, and so what I think as I listen to the strategist is 2025 performance is going to be really based upon earnings, good old-fashioned earnings.
Yeah,
and if they come through like forecasted, maybe we'll be okay.
Janno Lieber is going to be with us in the next hour of the MTA here in New York. Dan and I are scheduled to be with us. What are we doing? There's a Dylan movie out. You know, I guess I got to watch it. Yeah, it's getting some press. All on the Watchtower. We're doing it here across all of Bloomberg surveillance today. Good morning.
I sometimes think I'm on the brink of knowing what I mean. Cities come and cities go, still I cannot find a place to call a home when there's a woman on my mind. Oh, show me some affection. Oh, give me some direction.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What do you say to people scared stiff in cash?
We've got an administration, presumably, that will be pro-business, lower taxes.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Thank you for joining us. The Sweeney Steel Report, that will be coming up here at 10 a.m. this morning, Paul. Haven't mentioned it yet today. Bitcoin resurgent.
pushing up against 100,000 again here at 99,100, Tom. So a little bit of a risk-on day today when you see your favorite crypto moving higher.
Yeah, and the 10-year real yield as well. I got a 2.25%. Kathy Jones, thank you so much for that discussion earlier as well. We welcome all of you across the nation on your compute, Apple CarPlay, Sirius XM, Channel 121 on Android. Drive careful across the January belt. Come on. It's partially January.
Exactly. It's winter.
Rob Carolyn to join us here on the storm that's been hyped all weekend. We'll talk to our wonderful meteorologist here in a moment. Bloomberg surveillance this morning brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to interactive brokers for lowest cost, global trading, and turnkey custody solutions, no ticket charges, and no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. Looking across equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, dollar a bit weaker. Chinese renminbi, though, renminbi, got that wrong. Just say yuan. Yuan weakened here a little bit as well. Right now, to a business flash, our Lisa Mateo from the Interactive Broker Studios.
And we've got U.S. stocks set for a second day of gains. This is after ending the longest losing streak since April on Friday. NASDAQ futures leading the charge, up 0.9%, 214 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 162 points. And S&P futures up 0.7%, 45 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.26%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.59%. And that is little change. The yield on the 30-year Treasury climbed to its highest level since November of 2023. Right now it's at 4.81% and little changed. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.9%. We have the Japanese yen up 0.4%. The euro up more than 1% at 104.20 against the dollar. The British pound up 0.9%. And we have Bitcoin up just over 99,000. More eco data this week, including the monthly jobs report, minutes from the Fed as well. And we have chip stocks really rallying after strong earnings from Taiwan's Foxconn. Foxconn up nearly 1%. Then you have NVIDIA stock. That rose after those results, up more than 2%. And then other semiconductor companies like Advanced Micro Devices up nearly 3%. Micron Technology up more 4%. And Broadcom up more than 1.5%. There you go. That is the Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Ed Ludlow in conversation tomorrow during the Sweeney Steel Hour.
Yep, absolutely.
With Jensen
Huang, NVIDIA, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
He's giving a keynote.
He is.
Friday, I don't know if you saw this, folks. I missed it, frankly. Microsoft came out and said they're doing 80 gajillion and large or whatever on CapEx.
Yeah, and that's just to build data centers.
Yeah,
that's just
which I don't understand.
Where are they putting all these things?
The most interesting chart this weekend was electric usage.
Yes.
And it's like, you know,
yeah, I mean,
up and away.
The utility stocks, Tom, are an AI play. Who saw that coming in 2024?
Right. Joining us now, and I just demanded he come on. Come on, Rob. I mean, I know I'm jaded. You're jaded. I'm sorry. It's partly January. 1912, Kansas City had 16 inches of snow. Is this media hype, or is this storm actually something more than January?
Oh, it's media hype. I mean, the areas that are getting the snow this morning, Tom, have been so snow-starved the last couple of years that, you know, this is a big deal just because it's snowing. It hasn't done it the last 2 or 3 winters. So it's a 6 to 10 inch snowstorm for some of the cities and towns around the Washington area. It's snowing pretty good right now, right along the I-95 corridor from north of Richmond, almost into the Philadelphia area. But then as you go further north, the precipitation really drops off, just some flurries and snow showers for the tri-state area, and mostly cloudy skies in Boston today.
So, Rob, what's the expectation for kind of just this winter season? Is the expectation that it's going to have colder weather, warmer than average, more or less precipitation? What's kind of the longer term forecast?
Well, Paul, the original forecast was for the winter, at least along the eastern United States, to run a little warmer than normal. We actually have been bucking that trend. Everything's been driven by the polar vortex, which has been expanding and contracting at a very rapid rate since the beginning of November, and that's what's been driving the pattern. It looks like much of the country east of the Rockies for January will see below normal temperatures. Now, once we get beyond the 21st, some of that cold weather may start to shift out west, but it is certainly looking like a January that's going to have plenty of cold air across much of the country.
So I'm looking at, we got a wall of TVs here, folks. You got the best radio studio in the country. There's a banner, dangerous snow and ice head east after slamming central U.S. in Midwest. Rob Carolyn, you've been doing this for years. Is the weather hype of media just getting worse and worse and worse?
It is. It is. It's gotten completely out of control. And again, I think some of it, Tom, is being driven by the fact that we've been going through a period of relatively snowless winters in the central and east part of the country the last 4 or 5 years. So people who really like winter storms have, and that's why they're on TV, have been kind of driving this lack of precipitation, at least wintry precipitation. And now that it's actually occurring, they have certainly been giving it the ride that they wanted.
Rob Carolyn, thank you so much. Our Bloomberg meteorologist, I just can't say enough about the balance in his coverage. It's something we really take pride in. And with that, as we talk about partly January, please drive careful out there. The black ice is what I'm for. There were some of the videos are really difficult.
Yeah, and the Kansas City Chiefs had a tough time getting to their game yesterday because they were caught in the weather in the Kansas City airport.
Mike McKee made that clear. Libby Cantrell called in. She had to, she called in sick at PIMCO today.
Okay,
Denver,
happens.
I guess, did it to him.
Yeah,
they sat out the whole team, right?
Yeah, I don't know I don't know who was playing yesterday.
Right now, we're going to start strong this 2025. Seth Carpenter manages a heritage at Morgan Stanley. I can't say enough about what Stephen Roach years ago wrought at Morgan Stanley, where he and Richard Berner said, we're not on one page, we're not a marketing exercise, we're going to argue, and it's going to be a constructive, visible argument on domestic and global economics. Seth Carpenter handles that heritage as Morgan Stanley as chief economist. Seth, what's the biggest thing you and your team argue about?
Wow, it's hard to narrow it down, but I think right now it is a question about what should our assumptions be for things like tariff policy and how big of an effect is global trade going to be for the global economy across the world in 2025.
What is the diffusement of technology? Our Ed Ludlow will speak with Jensen Wang from NVIDIA here tomorrow near 11 o'clock. What is the diffusement, as Trichet would say, the diffusement of productivity from technology?
Oh, that's a really critical question. My colleagues, especially in equity research, but across the whole research group here, we've been hyper-focused on AI for quite a long time, I have to say. And translating the micro into the macro is super tricky. So some things that people see as clearly increasing productivity, seeing when that's going to show up in the macro data is a little bit tricky, right? So if you think about my industry, the financial services industry, if a bunch of hedge funds all use large language models and are able to cover a lot more stocks, get more efficient, cover 3, 4, 5 times as many stocks as they had historically, I think everyone would think of that as being more productive. And yet, if they're competing with each other and they can all do it, we might see some of those gains get competed away and they still don't show up in the macro data. So translating the micro AI use cases to the macro data, that for me is a really interesting but super tricky question.
So, Seth, what are you and your team telling your clients about the incoming Trump administration and the economic policies that may accompany this administration? Is there any way to kind of position for that, or is it just too unknown at this point?
A little bit of both. What we've said, usually we do our year ahead forecast and it's supposed to be a bit of a roadmap for people. But now this time around, it's more of a set of risks and how to start to create a framework for those risks. So for economic policies that might move the macro needle, we break it down into trade policy, tariffs, immigration policy, fiscal policy, and then deregulation. And what might be slightly controversial is we've said for those last two, fiscal policy and deregulation, maybe move those off the table for 2025 for macro implications. Deregulation, I think, is going to be huge at a micro level, and definitely for individual sectors and parts of the equity market. But in terms of GDP, inflation, that sort of thing, I'm not convinced it matters at all, at least for 2025. Similarly, fiscal policy, we're at least for now assuming the Congress spends the better part of the year extending the tax cuts. And so again, it takes it off the table for 2025. So we're really looking at tariff policy and immigration policy as the key factors here. And so that's part of how we're trying to let people sort of narrow down at least the wide range of possible outcomes. Tariffs are push up inflation and they restrict growth. Immigration restriction would do the same thing. It would restrict growth and push up inflation. The key questions, and this is an area where we say forecast early, but forecast often. Are these going to come in one fell swoop? Are they going to get phased in over time, over the whole of 2025, or some combination? I think that's where the irreducible uncertainty is.
Given that backdrop, Seth, what is your call there for 2025 for this Federal Reserve, given some of those policy unknowns, I guess?
Absolutely. So right now what we're saying is the Fed's going to cut again in March and then in June. Chair Powell struck a more cautious tone at the December meeting. We think inflation, though, is coming down in the near term, and so that's going to give them a little bit of momentum to keep cutting rates. But we've assumed that the Trump administration is going to restrict immigration over time. It'll be gradual, so a step down for this year, but not a dropping off the cliff. And similarly, we've assumed a gradual phasing in of tariff policy. And so you don't really start to see the effects of that inflation until maybe midway through the year. And that's why we've assumed two very tentative rate cuts from the Fed, much like what they wrote in their dot plot at the December meeting.
You're deputy director of the Division of Monetary Affairs, which means Seth Carpenter, Dr. Carpenter, folks, had a shingle out front of his door at the Fed where it said, this is where we readjust the statistics. Are we going to readjust the statistics a lot this year, Seth? Are we going to have jobs reports amended, GDP amended? Is it going to be a year of, oops, we got it wrong?
So I think every year there's a bit of revision. I suspect there is a good chance that we're going to see a bit more of that. I think in the near term, right over the next 3 months, that so-called residual seasonality that we've seen in the PCE inflation numbers, I think that's a real possibility here that could throw a real curveball for the Fed. I will say the numbers on employment, right, given how much immigration we've had over the past couple of years, and as the BLS tries to catch up with sort of their different surveys, I think we could see some more revisions. This year, 2025, is probably the most difficult forecasting year since 2020 and maybe early 2021 when we had COVID. I mean, this is a really tricky year for forecasting.
It's really important, folks. Like, Paul, I've got on non-farm payrolls, 227, a moldy 36, 255, a moldy 78. It looks like a Rorschach test, Dr. Carpenter. And, you got revisions in there as well. What's the real run rate on, take a 6-month moving average. Beat Jason Furman for a moment. He was up at a small college north of Princeton.
Heard of that.
I can't remember. But do a Jason Furman for me right now, Seth Carpenter. And if you got a 3-month, 6-month annualized non-farm payrolls, the answer is it's going to drop down. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's right. So we're looking at about 170 or so for Friday's number. Look, the tricky part is immigration has clearly been a big thing. So the monthly run rate that would keep the unemployment rate constant is higher than it was historically. We know the unemployment rate went off of its lows of about 3.5% up to about 4.25%. So the run rate then, or the prints that we've been getting have averaged a little bit less than what that run rate is. And so, maybe we're fallen from the peak of immigration, a run rate of about 250 down to something closer to 200 or 175. We're looking for a roughly stable unemployment rate over the first half of this year because we do think things slow down a little bit, but the immigration inflows also slow down a little bit, so you get a bit of a balancing act there. Super tricky times for economics.
What has been the Morgan Stanley call, your call, about immigration and its impact on the labor market? Because it seems like no matter how many people come in, this economy absorbs them. They get jobs. They start paying their FICA and whatever. How has that really impacted? Do we have a good feel for that over the last several years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think a few things are pretty clear. One, there's been a big increase in labor supply from immigration, and that's part of how we were able to get 3% growth or a little bit more in 2023, close to 3% growth again in 2024, and yet inflation kept coming down. So this positive supply shock, I think, is undeniably there. There's got to be a demand component to it as well. And so all of that means part of the strong growth and yet falling inflation is part and parcel to this immigration surge. So a restriction of that, especially if you talk to the folks, for instance, down at Brookings, they would say, really good chance we get net immigration at 0 or even negative this year. That's a huge adverse shock to growth.
Seth, tell us about the dollar dynamics. I've got a 2-day jump condition here and a managed Chinese renminbi. Resilient dollar as well. What is the distinction within 6, 7, 8 pages of foreign exchange analysis on the dollar? What's the paragraph that matters?
I think the paragraph that matters, to come back to one of the uncertainties I was going to say that I was talking about before, is what did tariffs do to the dollar, to currencies, and to global growth? So part of our view has been, the dollar rallied going into the election. There's been some dollar strength. Is that overdone? Well, now we're seeing a little bit maybe more of a hawkish Fed, but I still think the market is wrestling back and forth with what tariffs are we going to see. Just the movement overnight and this morning after the news reports in the Washington Post about maybe a narrowing in the scope of some of the tariff policies coming out of the administration. I think that's the real question there, is how much do the tariffs slow U.S. growth versus how much do they slow growth in the rest of the world?
Seth, I got to make some news. Has Mr. Percent called you this? Is Mr. Percent Treasury designate? Has he dialed 1-800-Carpenter and said, "Come on board"?
He has not. He has not. I'm always happy to take calls though from any public servant, because after my 20 years in Washington, D.C., I think the best thing folks in markets can do is to give an unvarnished, honest opinion of what's going on so that the policymakers can make the best decision.
There you go. I'm sure he's listening. Seth Carpenter, thank you so much. Get out the moving van. Seth Carpenter with Morgan Stanley, their chief economist, and again, public service to the nation with the Federal Reserve and Treasury as well. Futures up 44. The Sweeney yield 4.25% on a 2-year yield. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, a disruptive winter storm along with plunging temperatures are stirring up dangerous conditions across the U.S. central and southern states all the way to the East Coast. New York City will get a dusting, but in Missouri, there are blizzard warnings. Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas has already dispatched several teams to treat the roads and keep the city up and running during the deep freeze.
We have several hundred trucks that are out on the streets, up to 300, that are addressing issues right now. But as we know, it continues to snow heavily, and so this will be an operation that we expect to continue for several days.
Meanwhile, Washington, D.C. is also facing the snowstorm and has a busy week, including the funeral for former President Jimmy Carter, and Congress planning to convene today to certify the 2024 election results for President-elect Donald Trump. President Biden will be in New Orleans days after the New Year's Day attack that killed 14 people along with the attacker on Bourbon Street. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
The White House says Biden's visit will come before the president's previously planned trip to Los Angeles. The assault, in which an Army veteran drove a truck into a crowd of revelers on Bourbon Street in the earliest hours of New Year's Day, also left more than 30 people injured. Biden, who offered condolences to the families of the victims, says he has directed authorities to accelerate their investigations into the attack in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas, in which a Tesla Cybertruck exploded outside the Trump Hotel. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
President Joe Biden is blocking offshore oil and gas development in over 625 million acres of U.S. coastal waters, citing environmental and health risks. The action has been met with criticism from the oil industry and Trump's transition team, who argue that it will lead to higher gas prices and undermine domestic energy production. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Duke over SMU, and I noticed, I don't know what I'm talking about. Paul Sweeney, SMU is now an ACC team.
I did not know.
Is basketball as screwed up as college football?
Exact same. It's no different. It's just ridiculous.
Everybody's in one conference.
Exactly.
Now.
Everybody's in one conference, so we don't know who's going. But so we're going out to the West Coast 4 or 5 times a year now. So that's how it works. But
and
anyway,
they're in the conference with Duke.
Yes, exactly. And but Maryland's not. They're in the Big Ten.
Do you predict this will change March Madness?
Probably. I mean, we're still going to get the top 64, 68 teams, and
they're going to do it better than football.
They'll duke it out. Yeah, so we'll see. But the Duke basketball team's for real this year.
Feb 1, UNC
Yep.
Duke. You going to be there?
I am not, but I'll be watching.
Okay, you'll be watching.
I'll be
No question
watching.
about that. My word.
So yeah, Duke is for real this year. Watch out.
Yeah, they're number
Cooper
4 in the
Flight.
nation as we are there. Thank you, Ari. 8 straight wins. Sounds like
there
the
you go.
Detroit Lions. It's
Mhm.
too much. Futures up 44. We say good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got tech stocks leading the equity gains this morning. A big part of that, Microsoft had unveiled this spending plan that showed sustained demand for artificial intelligence. It plans to spend $80 billion on data centers. We have Microsoft shares up nearly 1%. And NASDAQ futures leading the charge, up 1%, 214 points. S&P futures up 0.7%, 46 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 171 points. The 2-year yield at 4.26%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.59%, and that is little change. To commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,643 an ounce. Meanwhile, Goldman says it no longer sees gold reaching $3,000 an ounce by the end of the year, and it's pushing its forecast to mid-2026. For oil, we have Brent crude $76 a barrel, WTI crude $74 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.9%. Few companies making news. Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel, they both filed lawsuits. It's an effort to save their planned merger after President Biden blocked the deal. U.S. Steel up more than 3%. And finally, Bloomberg reporting Disney and Fubo could be nearing a deal to combine their online live TV businesses. Basically, Disney will fold its Hulu Plus live TV business into Fubo. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
You got out the old Rolodex. Lisa, thank you. Did a search here. Who do I know that has Fubo? We turned to Paul Sweeney. What is Fubo?
It's a publicly traded company. Think of it as a cable TV service, but it's just via the internet. So you get live channels, you get all the cable
internet.
networks. Yeah. So it's
Are
simply
they competing against YouTube TV's $82 a month?
Yes, and they're not competing very well. So I think combined they might have 6 or 7 million people. That
Next to nothing.
Yeah. So, but it's a small company. It's about $500 million market cap. It's a publicly traded company, and Walt Disney's just saying, I've got this Hulu streaming business. Let's just put these two smaller substandard companies together, get a little bigger. Maybe.
Shogun won the Golden Globes big time.
Yep.
They were on Hulu. When does Disney own Hulu? Like, there are going to be all one streaming service?
Eventually, yes. And I don't know where they are in that process of buying Comcast's stake in Hulu. I'm not sure if that, I don't think that's happened yet, but it will.
I can't say, so Lucas Shaw reported that with our team in LA, and I can't say enough, folks. You want one newsletter that's really entertaining and yet smart. Lucas Shaw Screen Time.
Yep, that's a good one.
I anticipate it. Usually comes out Sunday 6-ish.
Okay.
And it's just really, really informative.
He's got
about
great
everything.
sources out there. Yeah, he's got
He
great
does.
sources.
I mean, he's talking to, Don and, David Zaslav. He's talking to them.
And his conference is out there. It's a who's who.
Yeah, it is. We should go out.
Movers and shakers. Yeah, exactly.
You can see us out there as well. Joining us now, it's been way too long. Leslie Vinja-Murray, I need to explain. She's a Chatham House, okay. She's got this incredible transatlantic position and is now chair of the faculty. I love this. The Queen Elizabeth II Academy at Chatham House.
Nice.
Which is really good and really earned with the perspective of transatlantic tension.
St. James Square.
Leslie Vinja-Murray, there was that photo of a first administration Trump leaning over the desk as Angela Merkel and others sort of stared back in woe. Are we going to redux that photo in the next 4 years?
Yeah. I mean, Tom, anything's possible. Donald Trump's coming back, and Europe is standing strong, ready to deal with this U.S. president, who they feel is, deeply familiar to them. I think that there is a great hope across much of Europe that Europe can stay united in that response. I think there's a real effort to treat Donald Trump as a normal U.S. president, to work with him. We saw Maloney, just traveled to Mar-a-Lago, but, Keir Starmer met with Donald Trump before he was elected. He traveled to Mar-a-Lago.
Okay, but this is important.
People recognize that this is real and that this is going to be tough.
But you said the elephant in the room question. Do you perceive that Donald Trump is, quote unquote, Dr. Vinjamiri normal?
I mean, define normal. This is obviously at the level of bombast and rhetoric and words very far from what over the last 7 or 8 decades Europeans had and the rest of the world had come to be seen as, normal language. But in terms of the politics and the policy, that's really what people are watching for. Is it normal to use tariffs against your partners and allies? No, but Donald Trump upended our understanding of what normal was as early as 2018. So there's been a lot of run road for understanding what's coming down the pike, and America's position has changed, its expectations have changed, but having a U.S. president that is pushing hard on, 3%, sometimes they say 5% of GDP spending on from NATO's U.S. NATO allies.
Yeah,
that is, for some European partners, quite simply not politically or economically possible. But they see this pressure coming, and it's not like last time, right? People are prepared. They've been watching the signals, and its own domestic challenges.
Paul, this is the key thing is, and I keep saying this, we're 8 years on, the president-elect is older, and it's not like last time, as Dr. Vinjamiri talks.
Exactly. What do you expect, or what do the folks in Europe expect from the first 100 days, which are typically a key period of time for any new administration?
Well, look, on the foreign policy side and foreign economic policy side, they're really waiting to see, number one, what does Donald Trump do on tariffs? Now, there's reporting coming out just today, I'm sure you've seen, that the president-elect is moving away from blanket tariffs of 10 to 20%, which he's talked about before, and talking more about narrowly focusing those tariffs on products that come into that pose some sort of economic or national security threat to the U.S. Not clear what that means, but so people are watching to see what happens with tariffs, number one. Number two, they're waiting to see what happens with Russia and Ukraine. How does Donald Trump try to get a deal? Does he try to get a deal by putting pressure on Putin? Or does he pull the plug on Ukraine? And we've seen many different proposals, not clear where this president will line up, in part because there is a diversity of viewpoint across the people that he's nominated to key posts.
Leslie, from the path from Wesleyan, you're too young to remember this, but the path from Wesleyan to LSE to Columbia, before your time, there was a thing called the Washington Consensus. We all can agree it's gone. It's like history. What's the new consensus?
There isn't a new consensus. What we know is that the Washington Consensus is gone because it didn't work for everybody, right? Trump is picking up on some very legitimate concerns that led to very high levels of inequality, a loss of U.S. manufacturing job. Combine that with technological advance and change and AI, and we know that the old way of doing things is not going to deliver the result that Americans expect or want to see. And there's been plenty said about that, so they know what their interests are. People know that the past is not delivered for most people. But the new consensus is alarmingly unclear. And if you look, as we know, even the Republicans, there is such a divide within this party between those who really want deregulation, tax cuts, AI and technology to be left to really plow forward, and those who have a very different notion of how the U.S. economy should be governed. And we're going to see that divide played out in Congress. We're going to see it played out between the donors that have really supported Donald Trump and want to see a very different kind of China policy and economic policy than those in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. So there is a lot of uncertainty ahead, and we don't know where the president is going to come down. It's interesting that on the H-1B visas, he came down on the side of the tech sector of Elon Musk. He said, let those high-skilled immigrant workers who can prove their worth, the engineers from India and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that gives us one really clear sign that this is a president who understands the importance of keeping the U.S. economy charging ahead.
Yeah. Leslie, thank you so much. Don't be a stranger. We'd love to talk to you often here in 2025. Dr. Vinjamuri with the Chatham House, London. Paul, I was telling somebody at breakfast, at early lunch yesterday, I just don't understand the technology we're dealing. I mean, I was the last one to have color TV east of the Mississippi River.
Going back.
My family.
Understood.
We had the Zenith with the rabbit ears.
Yep.
That was into the 2000s.
Oh, boy, that's...
Edon is out with a tweet of the day, no question. He's driving a Rivian,
Yep.
which I would just like to drive. I mean, it's a cool car. It's like, how do you get it? And he's watching us on YouTube in his Rivian.
Really?
Yes. He's got a tweet up.
Okay, very good.
Eden,
this
thank you
is
so
bringing
much for that.
All the technology together. We're all over the place.
It's like every day I'm surprised by this. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Get out front of this. And of course, Single Best Idea, we're out on YouTube Podcasts as well. We're on YouTube this 2025. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures pointing to a higher open. Stocks snapped a 5-day losing streak on Friday. We've got NASDAQ futures leading the charge up 0.9%, 207 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, 178 points, and S&P futures up 0.7%, or 45 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.27%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.59%, and that is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.9%. Also have to point out the loonie on the rise. The Globe and the Mail reporting Justin Trudeau expected resignation. Yes,
Mateo with
up
the loonie.
0.9% at 143.07 against the dollar. Few companies making news. We'll get to UPS looking to offset those stagnating revenue of its package delivery business. It says it has a goal to double its $10 billion healthcare revenue by 2026. And sources say Italy in talks with SpaceX over a more than $1.5 billion deal in providing encrypted telecoms. And finally, sources saying Paychex in advanced talks to acquire Paycor. It's a smaller rival in payroll processing. Paycor, though, up 23%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Across this nation on your commute this morning, the one everyone in transportation is watching. No, Paul, it's not the build out in Newark.
I know.
Or what they're doing with JFK Terminal 1. Janno Lieber joins us today, running the MTA off of this congestion tax in New York, and we're thrilled that Bloomberg Surveillance will bring him to you for the entire rest of this hour. An incredibly busy day, important Monday for you. I've got one question which Kriti Gupta in London actually brought up, because I know Paul's fired up here with a bunch of questions as well. Part of the bargain in Stockholm is they have a world-class taxi service. Part of the bargain in London is they have a world-class taxi service. I'm in taxis constantly here that are third world. How does this congestion tax get us, as Kriti Gupta mentioned, to a better taxi experience?
Well, I think, Tom, thanks for having me. I think that the taxis in New York are dominated, as we all know, by Uber and Lyft, and they actually are looking forward to having clearer
But I'm going to
streets.
interrupt here. You're
Yeah.
telling the poor people of New York City to take an Uber?
Yeah, you know what? Right now, the cost difference between Uber and taxis is not all that great. I'm not in the taxi business, so I'm trying to answer your question. But the point is, with less congestion on the roads, you're going to have the taxi industry, I think, is going to do better. I mean, people will be able to move more quickly, pick up more rides, and for what is actually 75 cents per ride, when the average ride of a taxi ride now in New York is like $25. So 75 cents a ride, and they're going to be able to move much more quickly, take more rides. I think it's going to be good for the industry.
Part of the outcome that you guys are hoping for, that we're all hoping for as a city, is reduce traffic, reduce congestion within the city. When will we know if that's actually happening?
It's a good question. It's going to take a while to take effect. New Yorkers adjust, and they are resilient, but it's going to take a little while. So we're going to be watching it very closely, day by day, week by week. I don't expect to see some dramatic change on the first or the second day. Over time, we're expecting a 10 to 20% reduction in traffic. That's what we're shooting for. But Paul, the big issue here is New York is leading. New York is, and I'm thinking, I know you're an international outfit. New York is becoming a 21st century city. We just did, 2 train terminals in the last couple of years. LaGuardia Airport, a total rebuild. It's #1 in the country. JFK is getting rebuilt. I know your Newark Airport is getting investment. This is about being a 21st century city where we don't spend all our time stuck in traffic. The business community has always supported congestion pricing under Mike Bloomberg's lead, in part because congestion and time spent in traffic is a tax on our economy.
A lot of folks view this congestion pricing as simply a tax on consumers. Your budget is $19 billion, I believe, at the MTA for 2024. You need more money? That's what a lot of folks are saying.
Listen, this is, as you said, this is 90% of the people who come to the central business district take transit. We're carrying 6 to 7 million people a day on mass transit. So, we have to pay a lot of people, and 80% of our costs is wages and pensions and benefits. No question, we have to pay a lot of people to deliver that service. But the bottom line is congestion pricing is about the benefits. It's about not just money for the MTA, but about lower traffic, cleaner air, safer streets, and a more functioning economy. That's the goal. That's why London did it, and that's why we're following.
I was in Paris last week, and all I can say is what a difference in congestion. It was just beyond pleasant. When are we going to see results? Are we talking Tuesday? Or are we talking 2027?
Listen, I don't want to sit here and tell you I have a crystal ball. The bottom line is adjustments are going to be made. It's going to definitely take place over time. Let's watch it together. There's going to be total transparency on the MTA side. We're going to have a dashboard out for everybody to look at how many cars came in as compared to before the system went in, and how many of them are chargeable, and we're going to be monitoring it closely.
Number one question I get is what happens, folks, for those of you across the nation and worldwide, the outer edge of Manhattan, north-south, is the FDR and the West Side Highway. What happens to those two important thoroughfares where I believe there's no congestion tax?
Yeah, well, the idea is that these so-called excluded roadways that are on the edge of Manhattan, that people should be able to use them to get around the congestion zone. Listen, we always talk about drivers like they're the dominant reality. I know you guys take transit. 90% of people who come to the central business district take transit. There are only 130,000 people coming to the CBD who drive their personal cars as opposed to 1.5 million jobs. So I don't think that we're going to have some catastrophic traffic impact because a portion of those people do elect to take transit, or that people are avoiding the charge. I think we're going to see it all get baked in over time, but we're going to watch it closely, and we're going to talk to you about it.
We have a new president coming in a couple weeks.
Here you go. Really you're going tunnel, right?
Exactly. No, just what do you think President-elect Trump will do, if anything, about this plan?
I don't know. We got sued in every court from east of Mississippi.
I was going to say, is there anyone who hasn't sued you?
Yeah, but
Lisa Mateo, are you filing this morning?
Yeah, but you know what? We won every lawsuit because we did a 4,000-page study. The feds approved it. It took 5 years to do the study. It takes about 5 minutes to figure out New York has a congestion problem if you stand in Midtown.
Right.
But what President Trump is going to do is, I'm not certain. There's a lot of Republican politicians who are against mass transit and who rail about this. President Trump is also a New Yorker who owns office buildings, and 90% of the people who work in his office buildings come on mass transit. So I'm optimistic that he will get it.
We are on Janno Lieber, CEO of the MTA, with us today for this extended block here. We welcome all of you on Bloomberg Surveillance nationwide in your commute and on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg podcast, to say the least. I have talked to Mayor Adams not once but twice about a New Orleans experiment, I believe over in Europe, of free bus service for the poor. The congestion tax is about fancy people like Paul Sweeney in his ginormous car, or me being driven by the Bentley down Fifth Avenue. Forget about it. What do we do to help really needy people who need to commute from, I'm going to say, Rockaway Beach up to wherever?
Okay, well, let's just be real, because 95+% of those people you're talking about, low-income people who live in the boroughs, take transit. They don't drive because parking in Midtown is
Should we offer them free bus service?
But you know what we're offering? What we're offering is we have for the first time, the MTA, under Mayor Adams' leadership, has been pushing a fair fares program that cuts the price of transit in half for low-income people. And you know what, Tom? Transit is one of the very few things that makes New York affordable. It's 15% the cost of owning a car. It's already a good deal at full price.
Right.
At half price, it's out of sight. And so I'm confident we're dealing with the concerns of that community as well as the broader goal.
What is the delta on going from, Danielle is all over me here. She and Michelle Kasky have done great work for Bloomberg on this, Daniel Moran. What has been the delta from $15 down to $9? How does that change the Janno Lieber world?
Okay, good question. Listen, Governor Hochul...
It's my only good one of the day, so stay with us.
Yeah. So Governor Hochul, after we were moving towards implementing in June, decided that she wanted to take away the sticker shock. And so she, after a pause, knocked the price down by 40%. So instead of $15 for
did she call you, or did you learn about it?
She called me. She called me. It was shortly before she announced it, and it certainly was a shock to the system for some of the folks who have been working on this. But in the end, it has worked. What it has done is its message to the public that we are looking at an easy implementation, that she's worrying about affordability, but we're getting the benefits. Tom, you said, how does it affect the MTA? How does it affect me? It will take us a little longer to raise the statutorily required $15 billion, but we have enough work going on that we can continue to make progress on rebuilding the subway system. In the meantime, it's been a net positive.
We're going to be, one of the intentions for congestion pricing is to drive more of transit folks to the subways. How about safety of the subways? Where are we there? Because there's, a concern is that you're well aware that post-pandemic maybe not.
Listen, the overall stats are positive. Last year we were actually 12.5% less crime than 2019, the last year before COVID. But there's no question that some of these high-profile incidents, terrible attacks, have gotten in people's heads and made the whole system feel less safe. And there's a little bit of disorder that's crept into the public space since COVID. There's no question about it. I say the criminal justice system has to do its job and make sure these people who do that kind of stuff, most of whom who have long rap sheets, are put away. There are very, very few of these folks, but they have an impact on people's sense of safety, and we need to deal with them in a way that protects the riders and the public.
First time I went down the stairs in a Tokyo subway, there were the guardrails or the walls or whatever. We put a man on the moon. This is New York City. You mentioned the shining light of LaGuardia, $19 billion on JFK as well. Can't we put up guardrails quickly in our subways?
You're absolutely right. The quickly part is the one challenge I would say we got.
Well, New York City quickly,
we put $1 billion in our new capital program. Since fare evasion and this whole phenomenon has definitely accelerated post-COVID, we put $1 billion in our new capital program for that. So we are going to start to replace all these turnstiles, which worked when I was a kid, but clearly are ineffective now in the era that we're living in. We got to replace them. You're absolutely right.
But are we going to put in walls to protect people at the edge of the subway?
Yeah.
Lisa Mateo and I are sitting at home with our offspring going, take the Uber. That's the reality, Janno.
Okay, so listen, we have started to put up barriers, chop, which is really literally these little half height walls along the platforms, and we're going to accelerate doing that. One complexity is those super high tech barriers that you get in European train stations and the newer stuff literally are too heavy for the platforms that our 100-year-old system has. So we can't do that, but we're going to start to accelerate these barriers so that anybody can position themselves so they feel safe on a subway platform. We don't want people to feel otherwise.
So I know when in conceiving of this plan here, there are a lot of exceptions for different people who would be exempt from this congestion pricing. For example, the Hampton Jitney is exempt, yet firefighters' personal vehicles to get them into the firehouses are not. That seems kind of odd, but I know there's trade-offs everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, there was an across the board, this was done by a panel that was studied, that there were 130 separate requests for exemptions. Yep. And what they said is what we're going to exempt is we're going to exempt disabled people, we're going to give a huge discount to low-income people, and we're going to make sure that buses, which are a form of mass transit, whether they're operated by the MTA or otherwise, are exempt. That's where you get something like the Hampton Jitney. Now, in fairness, the Hampton Jitney has 50 people on it, and if those people drove, it would take up a lot of room. So it makes sense. We don't talk about personal vehicles. We're not going to choose who is special. The real goal here is to have people make rational choices. If they want to get their employer to pay them to drive in, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But that's not for the government to decide. The broad decision was what it was. But let's, today is really a historic day, and we ought to be focused on the fact that New York is back to leading, that we're doing what Mayor Bloomberg did in the old days, which is New York's a problem we're in the problem-solving business. We're dealing with our problems. And government seems paralyzed in a lot of the United States. We are dealing with the realities of what it takes to be a 21st century city.
Daniel Moran is writing this up, and she's like, okay, we're leading the way. What's the next city to do this nationwide?
That's a good question. They all call me.
The door's locked over there. Danielle says you can't get out unless you answer the question.
Well, they all call me and they say and they ask for information because they're all taking a look at it.
Boston?
It could be because the key is we are so lucky because cities all over the United States have traffic problems like crazy, and it's crushing their economy and their development pattern and their appeal to employers. But only New York has this out-of-sight mass transit system. Maybe Boston, maybe Washington, maybe Chicago, because they have the alternative.
Mm-hmm. I'm cutting you some slack here. And folks, let me tell you, I'm not even part of this debate. I was below 57th Street once last year.
Yeah, that's not happening.
I have no life. What can I went to Brooklyn a couple years ago. It was beautiful.
Come on over.
I thought it was Brooklyn, Massachusetts, and they said, no, it's Brooklyn, New York. Janno, let me cut to the chase here and the heart of the matter. Somebody once explained to me that New York is not London or not LA. You've got X number of bridges, X number of tunnels. It's a challenge here like no other challenge. Where's the bottleneck going to be with the congestion tax?
I think that the great thing is if you reduce traffic in general, there's less chance of bottlenecks across the board. That's the benefit, that even the people who have to drive or choose to drive are going to get a better experience so their time is not wasted stuck in traffic. That's the goal. I don't know exactly where the bottleneck's going to be, but the goal is to have fewer of them.
So we're Wall Street, we're global Wall Street. Talk to us about this bond that's going to be issued. A, what is it, and when will you guys issue this? some bonds to raise capital to then invest back into the system?
Good question. So our CFO at the MTA, Kevin Willens, ran Muni Finance at Goldman for many years.
Okay, so
Kevin is when the governor dropped the toll by 40%, he took a hard look when that started to unfold at whether we could still raise the money that the law requires, $15 billion to be raised from the revenues. And the answer is yes, we can do it. It will take a slightly different structure. It'll take a different length of time, but we're going to be able to do it probably in multiple bond offerings rather than a single one. Originally, they planned a single bond offering, $15 billion. Now it's going to probably take a couple of years and a couple of different offerings.
You've been more than generous with your time. I want to talk about the reality, and I'm speaking for the headquarters here, the investment Mr. Bloomberg has made. I should mention, folks, Mike Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, and he is, of course, the owner of Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and I think, does he sign your paycheck?
I think he
signs
does.
mine as well.
Yep.
You know, it's just simple. We go up 3rd Avenue, and it's ruined. I got a bike lane, I got bus lanes, I got some kind of parking in the middle. Basically, we've taken 6-lane streets, 5-lane streets down to 2, and you're living it as well. I got an Amazon truck on the right and a FedEx truck on the left. Now everybody's going up Park Avenue because they can't get up 3rd Avenue. That's just my little soap opera.
Yeah.
How do we get rid of the parking issue? Peter Coy at the New York Times has been brilliant on this. How do we change parking so 3rd Avenue isn't a driveway?
Well, I mean, listen, these are issues that the city of New York is going to have to wrestle with. You talked about how good your experience was in Paris, and Paris has done a lot to make it easier for bikes and pedestrians and to take away a little room for cars. That is part of the strategy that's been effectively followed. But I'll say this. Thankfully, the city's getting rid of dining sheds, which took up a ton of room.
Dan Doctoroff was big on this.
Yeah, getting rid of dining sheds. You know, we love our restaurants. They're rocking and socking after COVID, but we don't need to give out free real estate in the middle of the street anymore because people can't go indoors.
This is not.
So that is one factor. But I'm for more the bike lanes and certainly the bus lanes. If we can put 50 people on a bus who would otherwise be driving 50 individual cars, it's a net positive for the city, even for the drivers. So we're going to keep focused on a streetscape that works. But you know, it's still a work in progress, Tom. We're still learning. And coming out of COVID with the dining sheds, I think we got to make some progress.
Sweeney demands we got breaking news here. Can you solve the New York Giants and the Jets? Can you do
John's a Giants fan.
I'm a Giants fan, and I stopped paying attention about 2 months ago.
Well, there's some breaking news here. They decided this morning they're going to keep the GM, keep the coach. Joe Shane is GM. Brian Daboll is coach. They're going to be retained despite.
We want the streets back to the way they were when Bob Dylan sang All Along the Watchtower. Janno, thank you so much. Janno Lieber, the MTA. Good morning to you across the nation.
No reason to get excited. The thief he kindly spoke. There are many here among us who feel that life is but a joke. But you and I, we've been through that, and this is not our fate. So let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
I'm sorry, it's a boom economy, and that's what we're adjusting to.
Neither party seems to want to take on deficits at all.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Thank you for the voluminous comments on Janno Lieber being with us of the MTA in New York. Wasn't sure how this play across the nation. Wow.
Yeah.
What a response across the nation.
I mean, as he said, it is a historic day in New York City.
It is.
I mean, it's fundamentally going to change how a lot of people deal with, the center of Manhattan, Tom.
I promise I'll go below 57. I'm going to go below 50. 57th Street here at some point. Just across the Bloomberg, the headlines here on the first Monday of the first full week of 2025. In Canada, Justin Trudeau to make announcement at 10:45 from Ottawa. We will have this, of course, Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele will be with you. We've got a prodigious ability up in Toronto and Ottawa and, of course, all of the provinces, and we'll give you full coverage of what do I say, suggested to be a resignation?
Could be. That's the reporting I'm seeing.
We see that. That's just across the Bloomberg here, 10:45 this morning. I think Ottawa, we're in the same time zone as Ottawa.
I think so.
I think so. I think we can go with that. Futures advance up 45 earlier. Janno Lieber of the MTA driving futures higher, up 51. The VIX 16.38. Bloomberg surveillance this morning and always were brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Dan Ives to join us here in a bit. We'll start with Ed Ludlow's interview with NVIDIA's leadership. We'll have that tomorrow. Dan Ives here in about 10 minutes. But first we start strong with Lori Calvasina of RBC Capital Markets. Lori, up 20%, up 20%. How do you model up again?
Well, thanks for having me, Tom, and Happy New Year. Look, I think you can't really do it from a valuation perspective. My valuation model is the most conservative one in our targeting process. But I do think on the sentiment side, we had an important development in December, which was that everybody got worried. And so we saw AAII net bulls fall from a range, that had been one standard deviation above the long-term average back in October. It stayed elevated as we got into early December, and it's pulled back now to the long-term average if you look at the 4-week average. And if you look at the weekly data point that came out last week, I think the bulls and the bears were basically at parity with one another. And that actually improves the setup for stocks going forward. So I think we can get there. I think you can also have earnings help drive the market higher. I just don't think you get it from a valuation expansion perspective. I think we've really done the valuation expansion that we're going to do in this cycle.
Hey, Lori, how about earnings? How important are they going to be here? It seems like the Fed's not going to be doing too much heavy lifting for me in 2025. It feels like, and I can't imagine getting multiple expansion from here. So it feels like if any performance we're going to get in 25 is going to be earnings driven. Is that a fair assessment?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Paul. And look, I do think earnings have some challenges as we go into this next reporting season, namely margin expectations have been coming down. If you look at the bottom-up sell-side consensus estimates, that's been underway since the middle of last year, actually, but it's continued as we look at these past few weeks. And if you think about, sort of the dollar, a stronger dollar typically causes downward revisions. And I know the dollar's been all over the place, and showing some weakness, at least last I checked this morning. But the 4Q strengthening that we had, that cake is already baked. So we've got to sort of see what companies say about that. And look, Paul, I've been doing this a long time. It always amazes me that when we go through these periods of dollar strength, I go in and, read earnings call transcripts, and companies, especially in healthcare and tech, like to blame weakness on the dollar, that everybody saw in real time, but nobody marks their models until we actually, get to the end of the quarter. But I think you've got some little issues like that. And I do frankly expect companies to keep the bar somewhat low, just that we do still have some uncertainty in terms of things like taxes and tariffs. So I think earnings are going to be good and solid, but maybe not a ton of excitement here in the very short term.
I want to talk about religion, Lori, and that what I saw in all the wrap-ups of last year in this great bull market, take it back to Ben Laidler and Christmas Eve of, I believe, 2018, is the worship of free cash flow. The have-nots, the people that aren't trading at NVIDIA multiples, do they have a new religion to emphasize free cash flow growth? Or do we await that? Why aren't more companies saying we got to boost free cash flow?
It's an interesting question, Tom. I'll tell you, it's not a big part of my process. And that may be because I'm sort of overly influenced by my small cap days, and I am a data nerd at heart. We've talked about that on this show before. But I will tell you that when I look at different databases and try to bring in free cash flow data, especially free cash flow estimates, it's really kind of garbage-like when you try to aggregate it up to the market level. So I'm not, to be honest, a big, sort of part of that philosophy.
So, Lori, as we think about 2025, it seems like, again, 2 years in a row, we've had 20% plus returns in the S&P 500, in large part tech-driven. Quite frankly, it seems like this has been a tech-driven market for 15 years. Is tech going to be a leader in 2025? Does it need to be a leader in 2025?
It's a great question, Paul. And if you actually go back, and I think it was after Trump's first victory, we went back and looked at sector performance in the 12-month period after that first Trump victory, that November election, and we found both financials and tech outperformed. So it doesn't shed a ton of light on the growth versus value trade at the sector level, but we did see growth stocks generally outperform in that period. And we've seen growth stocks, big mega cap tech type names continue to hang on to their leadership here in the aftermath of this election as well. And look, I think a lot of people want this market to broaden out. You can count myself in that camp.
Yeah.
That being said, I think we have to understand why we have had so many head fakes so far. And it is simply because the value part of the market, the rest of the S&P, whatever you want to call it, has just not put up superior earnings growth. And the Mag 7, it has been fighting back. And we see it in terms of near-term consensus expectations. They're still dominant, even though a ramp down is anticipated, and long-term earnings growth expectations are still sitting at big highs relative to the rest of the market, and that is sustaining the premium valuation multiples. Until you break that, and I think a hotter economy than what we've been expecting, like more like a 3% economy than a 2% economy, I think can help that value part of the market see earnings growth, move up, but we're just not seeing it yet. And so I think, to be honest, if I look back at my December meetings, this whole go with value broadening, it just seems so consensus right now, especially in the fact that the earnings growth dynamics aren't shifting.
Lori Calvasina, this we will continue with RBC Capital Markets. Dan and I have scheduled to be with us if we can wake him up out in Las Vegas. A headline across the Bloomberg professional service: Trudeau intends to step down as Liberal Party leader. That from the Canadian broadcast company CBC. With that, the Prime Minister intends to step down as Liberal Party leader. Paul, the date calendar there's 10:45, right?
Yep, exactly right. So we'll bring that reporting to you.
We'll bring that to you here. And Lisa Mateo, of course, with a loony quote earlier, loony in a little bit, 142.80. Lisa Mateo on the loony there. Dollar Canada.
On your dashboard.
The loony.
And we're speaking to somebody from the Royal Bank of Canada.
It's just perfect.
It's just all coming together.
It's just all coming together. Lori Calvasina, I look at where we are, and what I'd suggest is sort of the zeitgeist now as everybody's pulling away. The last 5-6 days, I think like 365 days ago, we had the same thing going on. How do you interpret the pulling away we're seeing right now? People selling Mag 7, people lightening up.
Yeah, look, I think there is a natural inclination to take some profits when you've had this frothy sentiment in place. And I don't think people realize how much the sentiment started to unravel, but there's been a big concern about valuations, and we've got a lot of uncertainty on the policy front. So I do think it makes sense to sort of retrace here a little bit, take some profits, and see where we need to redeploy in a bit.
Lori, thank you so much. Lori Calvasina, RBC Capital Markets, just a huge value add always. Futures up 48, Dow futures up 233. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got U.S. stocks set for a second day of gains after putting an end to the longest losing streak since April on Friday. Right now we have NASDAQ futures leading the charge, up more than 1%, 215 points. Dow futures up 0.5%, 233 points. And S&P futures up 0.8%. Or 47 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.27%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year 4.61%. And that is little change. To currencies, we have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.9%. The Japanese yen stronger. We had the euro up more than 1% at 104.11 against the dollar. The British pound 125.28 against the dollar. And Bitcoin up more than 99,000. Chip stocks rallying. Strong earnings from Taiwan's Foxconn up nearly 2%. Then NVIDIA stock rose on those results, but also in anticipation of the CEO's keynote address at CES in Las Vegas. Those shares up more than 2%. And finally, other chip companies. Advanced Micro Devices up nearly 3%. Micron Technology up more than 5%. And you have Broadcom up more than 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Program note at 10:45. Bloomberg Radio will take live the comments of Mr. Trudeau of Canada. The headline from CBC, he intends to step down as Liberal Party leader, an 11-year tenure as the 23rd Prime Minister of Canada. We welcome all of you across the nation. Good morning to Awaking Las Vegas as well. Last night he held court at the Rosina Cocktail Lounge at the Venetian in Las Vegas. Joining us, Dan Ives. It's CES. Dan, let me get right to it because of time. and it's just simple. Everyone there will be riveted by the leadership of NVIDIA speaking, and with Ed Ludlow tomorrow on Bloomberg. What are they listening for from Jensen?
Look, it's really because Jensen's the torchbearer, the one that has the best vision of AI. And it's really Jensen talking about the demand outlook, what he's seeing, but more importantly, what we see over the next year in terms of the applicability for AI on consumer, on enterprise. I think that's really the key. This is really going to be the first sort of peak at what I'll say generational AI in 2025.
So, Dan, out at CES, again, hundreds of thousands of tech people from all over the world come together to see the latest gadgets and the latest technology. I mean, literally, it's a global get-together. Is it all about AI this year, Dan? Because I feel like there's themes every couple of years. It feels like this has got to be an AI-themed CES.
Oh, they might as well rename this AI in terms of this CES. Because, look, going to this for whatever, decades, sometimes whether it's drones or refrigerators that talk to you, things that are not necessarily going to be applicable en masse. It's the biggest tech generational theme that we've seen in 40 years. And that's why the other thing I'd point out is that I'd probably say 50, 60% of people that I know would never come to a CES are now coming because it shows the difference.
What did you make of Microsoft's announcement Friday? They slipped it in. Sweeney was distracted. I was distracted. Only reason I knew about it was Lisa Mateo said, OMG, $80 gazillion on CapEx. Well, how do you fold that over to the Dan Ives optimism?
It goes back to, what we've talked about on the show, for years. You're talking about almost a doubling of CapEx. So anytime people want to talk about fraud, valuation, they don't see it in their spreadsheets and sitting in the bears in their cave. It comes down to AI, CapEx from big tech. And what that shows is it's 10 p.m. in this AI party. It goes to 4 a.m. This thing's staying through 2025. That's why you continue to own big tech.
Dan, I kind of joked to people that maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, the CES show, the electronics show, really became the auto show with some gadgets around it. The auto industry just really took over in terms of, because of all the technology that's going in cars today. Where is the auto industry? Where's the Teslas of the world? Where's the EV presence at CES?
Look, I think that's obviously been toned down over the years, but I think, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there because it's really ultimately going to be about autonomous. And when you think autonomous, that's AI. So that's sort of my view in terms of where we see that on the auto side.
Okay, I want to talk financials now because, you have your Saturday morning thing. I'm sitting at the kitchen table like my mother, reading Barron's. And I've got my mimosa in my hands. Okay, full disclosure, as in the third one. What can I say? And I'm looking at Andy Soro, who's really quite good. He's gifted over it. Much of the run occurred late in the year, thanks in part to the bullish drumbeat of Wedbush analyst Ives, the loudest dressed man on Wall Street, whose recent calls on Apple have been as wild as his outfits. Dan, I'm hearing this shade from Andy that your 300 plus call, whatever, on Apple is shade. What are the financials that get you to the Ives $5 trillion outcome?
Yeah, and look, we love Andy. Look, I think it all comes down to the street is underestimating what this upgrade cycle is going to look like. I think
okay, but that's product. I don't want you to do product. I want you to put on a gray suit with Oxford shoes and tell me what the financials are going to be, Dan Ives, to get you to the Dan Ives nirvana.
Look, I think some of the parts, if you start to break this down, you're essentially going to have a services business that could be called 100, it's called 125, 150 billion, generating free cash flow margins of 40%. That alone lets the services piece is worth $2 trillion, just as a services business. You sum of the parts that with the hardware business, where I believe EPS ultimately is going to be up, low double digits, then you're looking at a combined valuation that's well over $4 trillion.
Paul, $59 billion pre-pandemic. Granted, it's getting old. We're modeling out this year a double to 118 billion on Apple, a double on free cash flow. That, folks, was financial talk from Dan Ives. Get one more in here, Paul.
Hey, Dan, what I think a lot of investors now are thinking about with AI is, all right, what's the next thing? How do I play this? What's the next derivative play for AI? You know, NVIDIA's already had its run. Maybe it's got more to go, certainly. But for those looking for the next
Dan, Paul's
iteration,
just looking for a stock idea.
Exactly.
Would you lay one out?
It's Paul. It's software because that's going to be the theme in 25. The use cases from Salesforce to MongoDB, of course, the Messi of AI, Palantir, Elastic. You're going to have this is going to be a massive year for software on the use case, and I think that's really going to be fun. And also remember, with Khan done at the FTC, M&A is going to massively accelerate. That's going to be a huge theme.
Did you really shut down the Rosina bar last night at the Venetian?
Look, that was the rumor, but I won't confirm or deny it.
Okay.
he's getting ready. After CES, he goes to the Orange Bowl. Down Penn State, Notre Dame.
Penn State, Notre Dame? Yeah. Is that this weekend?
It's coming up yet.
We'll be in South Beach, win that game, go 1-0, and then we'll see you in Atlanta.
So what do you think? I mean, seriously, Penn State, Notre Dame, I mean, this is classic college football. Dan.
It's it's going to be a classic for sports. We look, Freeman, love Notre Dame. I just think our offense is too tough, and I think Penn State comes out with a victory. I say we win by 7.
Did you see where they tipped over the press box of the Nittany Lions Stadium, like they're putting up the Dan Ives press box?
Exactly, doing a big renovation there.
It's a $700 million innovation. It's the best stadium in the world.
Are you writing the check for it, Mr. Ives?
No, it's we're going to have the Sweeney box there. It's all in the next 2 years.
Okay, well, very good. Problem. Dan, go back to bed. Dan Ives from Las Vegas at CES in preparation for Ed Ludlow's interview tomorrow, the Jensen Wing. It's in your hour tomorrow, right?
Yes, it
11:30.
is. We'll bring that live
And again, Mr. Trudeau, I want to say Pierre Trudeau. That's how old I am. His son, Justin Trudeau, at 10:45 this morning, scheduled from Ottawa. The headline is Mr. Trudeau from CBC intends to step down as Liberal Party leader. I'm stepping on Michael Barr, I'm sorry. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. In New York City, congestion pricing is here in Manhattan. The chief of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority says traffic is flowing freely at normal volumes and there haven't been any exceptional incidents. MTA head Janno Lieber sat down with Bloomberg Radio just a few moments ago.
The bottom line is congestion pricing is about the benefits. It's about not just money for the MTA, but about lower traffic, cleaner air, safer streets, and a more functioning economy. That's the goal. That's why London did it, and that's why we're following.
MTA head Janno Lieber, motorists driving into the zone south of 60th Street in Manhattan will now pay $9 during peak hours. A major winter blast of snow, ice, high winds, and plunging temperatures stirring up dangerous conditions across the U.S. central and southern states all the way to the East Coast. Washington, D.C. is in the path of the snowstorm and it has shut down schools today. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
The headlines coming fast and furious this first full week of 2025. You've got the Trudeau intends to step down as Liberal Party leader. We'll have that at 10:45 Wall Street time. And the new headline, Paul, Trump says his tariff policy won't be pared back. Futures up 50, they're now up 30. That may have had a little bit to do with it.
Maybe, yeah. So we'll have to see. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how aggressive President-elect Trump will be with his tariffs outright, or are they just part of some type of negotiating strategy vis-a-vis other trade policy with other countries?
We do international relations through this January, of course, into the inauguration. We will really focus here on the politics and the international relations of these turbulent times. There's a headline. I'm sure it will move markets. Just out moments ago, Mr. Trump says his tariff policy won't be pared back, different than some of the zeitgeist this weekend. Futures up 31, Dow futures give back. They're up 300, up 83. NASDAQ up 0.7%, and the VIX 16.49. We are on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And it's Bloomberg Futures Report, sponsored by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group Futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME Futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we've got tech stocks leading the equity gains this morning. A big part of that is Microsoft. They announced plans to spend $80 billion on AI data centers this year. And then Microsoft shares are up nearly 1% right now. We go to NASDAQ Futures, up 0.7%, 169 points. Dow Futures up 0.2%, 96 points. And S&P Futures up 0.5% or 33 points. The 2-year yield at 4.28%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.62%. And that's up 2 basis points. To commodities, we have Brent crude, $76 a barrel. That's up about 0.5%. We have NYMEX crude up at $74 a barrel. Spot gold lower, $2,622 an ounce. Few companies making news. Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel, they filed lawsuits in an effort to save their planned merger. U.S. Steel up more than 4%. And shares of Fubo TV, they are soaring. Let me just check. Up 186%. That's after Bloomberg reported Disney and Fubo TV could be nearing a deal to combine their online live TV businesses. And finally, Uber shares, they're up higher this morning too, up 5%. It announced it entered into an accelerated share repurchase agreement with Bank of America to repurchase $1.5 billion of shares of Uber stock. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. We got to review this again. Disney finally is going to figure out Hulu, Paul Sweeney?
Part of Hulu.
Just part?
Yes.
They're still not going to get the whole thing.
Not yet. This is their streaming part of the business, their advertising-supported streaming part of their business. Hulu Plus Live is going to merge with Fubo to create a virtual, it's kind of like an online, internet-owned delivered cable system. The
well
kids are doing
explained.
it.
I have no idea what you just said. We welcome all of you now with the markets. We're open here in 3 minutes. Futures are up 50. We're now up 36. Damien Sassower with us. We'll get the markets open and then continue with Mr. Sassower. I'm not going to mince words on a trading envelope. Chinese renminbi slipped over the last 2 days. Are they managing a devaluation depreciation, or is that just the market speaking?
No. I think they absolutely are. And I think you see that in the broader Asian FX complex, right? All Asian funding currencies, Taiwan dollar, Thai baht, even the peso and the rupee are all down year to date. But then again, we're on the third trading day of the year. But that's relative to the high beta currency crosses like Mexican peso, Brazilian real. They're up over 1.5–2% year to date. So the carry trade is back on, Tom. It looks like, in the FX markets, investors are looking to take risk again.
So, stepping back before President-elect Trump even gets into office, what have your clients been saying about 2025 and emerging markets with this new administration? Is it just let's wait and see? Let's just go to the safe spots where we think we're safe? What are they doing?
Well, I think you have to be underweight EM rates and FX right now in this market. I mean, if you just look at where U.S. Treasury yields are going, and we have some supply coming through this year, I mean, U.S. EM yields tend to track the U.S. So I think, you want to be underweight there. And then on the FX side, I mean, everything is screaming, as Tom rightly points out, to a weaker yuan, perhaps a weaker Korean won, perhaps a weaker Mexican peso if these tariffs take hold. So, it's underweight FX, it's underweight rates, credit's where you want to hide out. Paul, to your answer there. Credit spreads tend to tighten after a U.S. election, such as like we've seen. It's done so 5 of the last 7 years. U.S. presidential elections. So if EM spreads stay tight, U.S. financial conditions stay under control, EM credit should continue to deliver in the new year.
We've got a minute to the market opening. Damien Sassower, the last time you were in, I heard a more cautious Damien than I've heard in
very much
ages.
so.
Yeah. And if that's the case, how do you determine an unraveling like Ecuador ages ago or Stanley Fischer's 1998?
So, I mean, I think the way an investor, a prudent investor, would want to approach emerging markets in this environment is to approach it on a currency hedge basis. I mean, EM currencies were down 8% last year relative to the dollar writ large. So, I mean, it's very difficult to manage, money in an environment like that. So the way I approach it is take all that risk off the table. And what's really, really interesting, if you look below the hood, Tom, EM rates FX hedged, which should really track U.S. Treasury returns, have diverged completely. In fact, since October of 2022, EM rates FX hedged has outperformed U.S. Treasuries by roughly 10 full percentage points. I mean, that is a massive outperformance for two asset classes, which should really remain very closely tied to one another. So, I think that's the way I approach EM. I do it, I try to stay smart, stay prudent, and stay humble.
Yeah, like the Giants coaching staff. We're going to come back with Damien Sassower here, also with Bloomberg Business and Sports, I should point out. We'll talk to Mr. Sassower about some of the seasonal variations that are out there. Paul, I got green in the screen. I guess I'm trusting.
Yep.
I got NASDAQ up a Jensen's stick.
I know. It's people are putting
CES.
that risk trade back. CES, Las Vegas. It is literally more than 100,000 people from all over the world. Every language is being spoken.
It's like 100. It's like bigger than NAM or bigger than a plumber's
It's huge.
conference.
It is big. It is big.
And like you said, it's
and
all
they're
AI.
back. Post-pandemic, they are back, baby.
I guess they are. We need to look at the opening bell. We do that with Lisa Mateo.
And the opening bell report brought to you by IBKR, Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key political, economic, and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. And speaking of getting started, let's get right to it. S&P 500 up 0.7%, 44 points, 5,987. The Dow up 0.3%, 138 points, 42,864. And the Nasdaq up more than 1%, 229 points at 19,850. Checking in with the 2-year yield, 4.27%, little changed, and the yield on the 10-year, 4.61%, and that's up about 1 basis point. Quick check of currencies. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down 0.6%. The Japanese yen at 157.14 against the dollar. We have the euro up 0.7%, British pound up 0.6%, and we have Bitcoin just above 98,000. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. In an hour and 15 minutes, Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele will bring to you comments by Mr. Trudeau in Ottawa as he looks at an 11-year reign as Prime Minister of Canada. It is said he will walk away from the Liberal Party. We'll have to see how that goes. With us, we are so advantaged to have Damien Sassower with us. Canada out to 140, the loonie. Is that a depreciation of the Canadian dollar, or is it just ebbing and flowing like a Commonwealth currency?
Well, look, I mean, we got to talk about the Canadian economy relative to the U.S. It's far weaker than, we are feeling here today, right? So the theme of U.S. exceptionalism rings very, very true if you're north of the border here. And so you have Canada unemployment coming out later on this week. It's a big data figure. We're going to see how that kind of goes. But it's all about the inflation data this week, Tom. And, inflation in Canada seems to be under control now. But if we see that spillover from services to the core, such as what we think is going to happen is, you see inventory depletion, kind of people rushing to get ahead of these tariffs. Canada could really feel some pain here. So we expect more cuts from the BOC. I mean, you have to ask my colleague Will Hoffman in BI. He covers Canada. But, President Trudeau leaving throws a little bit of political uncertainty into the mix as well. So, all bets are off, I guess.
All right, that's our trading partner to the north. How about to the south, Mexico? What's the call these days?
It's interesting. Again, first 3 trading days of the year, the peso's up 2.5% already, Paul. If these tariffs don't come through the way, I guess it originally envisaged, the peso was very weak last year. I mean, it really got killed. So maybe there is some room for it to bounce back here and bounce back pretty sharply. So it's not like the real. The real is, there's inflation, there's a fiscal twin deficits in Brazil. It's a very different beast. Mexico's a lot more control, under control, so to speak.
I got time for one more question. Yeah. And I guess we should do
Vanderbilt Commodores?
We should do football. I mean, we should
football. We should do football. We should
how's
talk.
rotisserie going?
Funny you should mention the fantasy football champion 2024-25, Damian Sassower, who
look at you.
took the big trophy home this year with a really terrible team, but managed to do it. It was Josh Allen. Your Buffalo Bills did it for me. Josh Allen, he was just an animal. I think he should win the MVP this year. I mean, no one's been more valuable to their team. I mean, look, Lamar Jackson, he's the Michael Jordan of the NFL this year, but I put my money on Josh Allen to win it all.
Line up the Super Bowl here. What is the path you see there among the varied teams?
Well, I'm going to get Michael Barbeck in here because his Detroit Lions looked pretty damn good last night, so I have to kind of go with that. But, it's funny. I don't know if look, it's tough to bet against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and the Chiefs, but, I do like the look of the Ravens this year. I do. I think they're a tough team. I mean, they've got Derrick Henry. I think that they can surprise, perhaps. Who knows?
He's a beast.
Yeah, he's a beast. But look, again, Vanderbilt Commodores. I mean, let's talk about NCAA college hoops. We're 1 loss. We beat LSU. We're 1-0 in the SEC. It's time to party.
Are you really
the
worst four?
Damien, I got 30 seconds. Are you really moving to Lisbon?
All right,
really?
So we did have a family trip. I'll give you this one story, 30 seconds or less. My wife left her laptop in Sevilla on the way in the airport on the way to Lisbon, and I can't tell you, they drove her laptop. It's 5 hours by car from Sevilla to Lisbon. Back and forth for my wife. I mean, so the Spanish people, unbelievable people there. The Portuguese, obrigado, for very wonderful hosts. It was wonderful to be there. I loved it. I mean, no place on the planet where I can see the sun rise in the morning and set, from the same view. It's awesome.
It's great. Madonna, Damian Sassower, they're all in, all Lisbon.
All right, still
next trip.
Damian Sassower, thank you so much, and thank you for all you did for us last year. I'm sure it's going to. I'm watching dollar more than anything, folks. This year, you look at equities, bonds, currencies, commodities. I'm in the land of Sassower right now, looking at currencies. The Dow up 148 points. VIX flat 16.13. A very busy morning coming up. Comments from Justin Trudeau at 10:45. From New York City on YouTube, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. A rally in big tech giving stocks a nice lift this morning. We had the Nasdaq up more than 1%, 259 points. The Dow up 0.1%, 75 points. We had the S&P 500 up 0.7%, 46 points. We had the 2-year yield at 4.28%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.62%, and that's up 2 basis points. The dollar trimmed its losses after President-elect Donald Trump said his tariffs policy plan, it won't be pared back. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index now down about 0.5%. Shares of NVIDIA up more than 3.5%. That's ahead of its CEO's keynote address at CES in Las Vegas. We have other chip stocks on the rise as well. We have AMD up more than 3.5%. Micron up 10%. And we have Broadcom up 3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Now, a 3-hour conversation. We're going to squeeze into 15 minutes with Eric Balchunas, driving all of our ETF coverage. Paul's got all questions. I'm going to go to one. I think my basic study is the fees on ETFs are wicked small. Boston talk, wicked narrow.
Yeah.
How does Wall Street survive if everybody's going to the Balchunas world?
Well, there's going to be, as I said in my second book, there will be blood. It's going to get rough out there. And obviously, the stock market went up 26% in 2023, 25% last year. That is covering up all of this move to low-cost ETFs and Vanguard. To me, it's all part of the Vanguard effect.
Okay, so I cut to my good friend Lawrence Fink. How does Larry Fink pay the payroll if everybody in the world switches to BlackRock ETFs? I don't get it.
BlackRock is a great study because ETFs are a portion of the revenue, but they get hustle points left and right. They're into alternatives. They sell data. They do Bitcoin. You know, my metaphor for BlackRock is like a 12-time all-star that still dives on the floor for loose balls. I mean, nothing. They will leave no stone unturned. They're into buffers. They're into this. They are very opportunistic, and that is how you have to be to compete with Vanguard. They're the only one who can go toe-to-toe with Vanguard, so you should study them.
Paul, just so you know, hustle points is CFA level 4.
Exactly.
Just so you know.
All right, talk to us about thematic ETFs. Where do you think the thematic money is going to go to this year?
Well, our theme we go back to time and again is uranium, nuclear, NUKZ. Yeah. Nuclear is a great...
See, I throw that open-ended question out, which you're not supposed to do in, journalism. But you never know what you're going to get back from this guy.
Well, hear me out. Let me take you from... uranium sounds kind of wild, but this sector in flows or assets is now bigger than clean energy ETFs. You could argue it is a form of clean energy, but solar, wind, uranium is now bigger in terms of assets.
Okay.
Also, think about AI. To me, uranium is a backdoor AI play. Because Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're all buying reactors or building their own because they've got to power their AI. AI takes a ton of energy. So look for this as a backdoor AI play. So that's, one theme that we're watching.
Okay.
We also see a lot of, like, defense tech is another theme that's growing pretty well. Thematic ETFs are obviously going to ebb and flow, like innovation. There's an innovation ETF coming out that's like 5 years after ARK. So people are still building out more traditional themes, but those are a couple of the newer ones that we see some promise in. And also, here, I'm going to make you laugh now, Tom. The psychedelics ETF is up.
The what?
Psychedelics ETF is up 15% since New Year's Eve.
What is this, Grace Slick's Trust Fund?
PSIL is the ticker, I believe. But it's basically, there's a whole movement to try to cure depression and other things with sort of psychedelic drugs. And some of these companies are very small and they're getting acquired. One of the companies went up 90%. So it's one of these thematic areas that's been down a lot. It's been beat up, kind of like cannabis, I guess, but it's...
See, the thing is, he does the lectures and there's 1,000 people in the audience.
And he puts his
and
stuff
he
out
does
there.
this with a straight face.
I know. I mean, people are like, what did
Save his pause.
Everything I just said was accurate.
I know. It always is backed up.
A uranium ETF, because Microsoft has to build a data center in Arkansas?
No, not a data center, but AI. AI takes a ton of energy. Look, if you're out there listening and you're like, this is nonsense, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and AI reactors.
Yeah.
They're buying and building these reactors. The other thing is there's been a couple reactors reopened in the U.S. If you want net zero, you don't have a hope unless you use uranium. I mean, you have to go nuclear to have a chance at getting anything near net zero.
Can you short ESG in an ETF?
Yes. There's a bunch of,
Of course you can.
Of course.
Paul, get one more question in here, please.
All right. When did the flows stop flowing to ETFs?
Good question.
When is the game over? You were born on third base, thought you hit a triple with this whole ETF thing. When does it stop?
So we do look at competitors. One of them was direct indexing, which is like, oh, we'll just rebuild an ETF for you and then remove stocks that you don't like. Sort of like customized indexing, like a separate account. That was one threat that was along the way, but ETFs kind of rolled over that. The next one is tokenization, but I'm still kind of bearish on that. I just find, like, what is being solved here? When you go on to your brokerage account, you click a button and you own anything you want for almost no fee. Tell me how that's going to get disrupted anytime soon.
I was lucky in that at 15, I dived into the maelstrom of the Vietnamese peace talks in Paris. I don't care what you thought about Saigon. You sent your kids to Saigon over the holiday. What did your kids think about Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City?
My 13-year-old in particular, well, I went with them. I mean, I didn't send them alone, but everything is out in the open. Like, people have their shop right in front of their house. There's mopeds everywhere. There's telephone wires. It's just very raw and real. That was the big takeaway here. Also, the humidity.
We are 50 years from the end of the war, which I think is 1995 in World War II talk. Do your kids have any perception of the war?
I've been trying to tell them, and we went to the Coochie tunnels, and I was telling my 13-year-old, this is like the one war America lost. Yeah. We're like undefeated, but these tunnels are what beat us, and so that kind of turned them on. Yeah. It was a fascinating tour.
Just killer that you and your wife did this. Just absolutely killer. Congratulations on that trip. I'm sure kids will remember it for their whole life. Eric Bilchunas on ETFs and travel on the Pacific Rim. The Dow up 180 points, NASDAQ up 1.4%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Justin Trudeau will announce reportedly his resignation as leader of Canada's Liberal Party, triggering a contest to replace him as Prime Minister. According to the CBC, the announcement is expected around 10:45 a.m. in Ottawa. He has been under pressure from elected lawmakers in his party to quit for months. Snow is piling up in Washington, shutting down federal offices and schools as a winter storm that has snarled air and road traffic and knocked out power in 6 states makes its way east. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
It's a 6 to 10 inch snowstorm for some of the cities and towns around the Washington area. It's snowing pretty good right now, right along the I-95 corridor from north of Richmond, almost into the Philadelphia area. But then as you go further north, the precipitation really drops off, just some flurries and snow showers for the tri-state area, and mostly cloudy skies in Boston today.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. More than 1,300 flights have been canceled because of the storm, mostly in Washington and Baltimore. As Congress prepares to certify Donald Trump's win in November, the president-elect is widely expected to grant clemency to many of his supporters who rioted at the Capitol 4 years ago today. We get more from Bloomberg senior writer Stephanie Baker.
This issue of, his potential pardoning of the January 6 attackers is a deeply unpopular move. So I think it remains to be seen how that plays out. I think he'll likely ride that out without too much opposition. It's extraordinary how he's changed the narrative about what happened on January 6 from, a violent attack on the Capitol where people died, and he's now calling it a day of love. And I think it shows his use of disinformation and his ability to manipulate the narrative is just extraordinary.
Bloomberg's Stephanie Baker. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Michael's doing, he's rocking the news and all that. And I saw you looking up the triple leveraged uranium ETF.
Exactly. I didn't even think that. I guess what we should think about ETFs, if you think there should be an ETF for this, there is one. That's kind of what I'm coming to learn with Eric Bilchunas. Hey, do you guys have an ETF for this? Yeah, sure.
I don't understand how the Wall Street goes from 250 basis points, 2.5%,
Yep.
But we'll do it for 1.25%, but we'll do it for 75 basis points.
Yeah, asset management business, Tom. I agree. We grew up with Boston being the center of the world with all the mutual funds. I don't know where that business goes. Eric says they're being saved by the rising market.
I just find it fascinating. What's fascinating is the NASDAQ up 1.4%, Dow up 192 points on a Monday, the first full week of 2025. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks advancing on this first full trading week of 2025. We have the NASDAQ leading the charge up more than 1.5%, 307 points. The S&P 500 up more than 1%, 60 points, and the Dow up 0.4%, 206 points. The 2-year yield at 4.28%. That's little changed, and the yield on the 10-year 4.62%, and that's up about 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.7%, and we have Bitcoin up just over 101,000. Stocks on the move. Fubo TV, it's up 124%. Walt Disney Fubo TV nearing a deal to combine their online live TV business. That's what sources are saying. And then you have shares of payroll processing company Paycor. They're up 23% after a report that Paychex and advanced talks to buy the company. And finally, U.S. Steel up 5% after it filed a lawsuit with Nippon Steel to try and save their merger. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. Goldman Sachs out earlier this morning. David Miracle, thank you for bringing this over to us. Non-farm payrolls, 160-ish consensus. Goldman Sachs comes in light, 125. They're looking for a weaker number. But Paul, what's interesting is they forecast unemployment edging up to 4.3%.
Okay.
When do we get, is 4.5, 4.6? Is that like edge of 5-ish?
It feels like, it feels like you have to have a 5 handle, maybe. I'm not sure. We'll have to see.
Okay. Quickly here, and we're really featuring her commitment to Bloomberg's excellence, and she was excellent. She showed up as an intern. I'm like, what a machine. She's
still here.
Smart as Agata. Tatjana Dare joins us. Macro strategist M Live. The dollar. How do you fold in Audrey Child Freeman's world of the dollar into looking at equity markets this year?
Well, I think people are still expecting both of them to go up. Typically, you'd see them being negatively correlated, but for now, the drivers behind the stocks and the dollar are painting a positive picture for both, because it does rely on economic growth, which is expected to boost stocks, and the same factors are expected to boost the dollar. So for now, it hasn't been that much of a headwind, but earnings expectations are higher. That is true. We're expected to grow in the double digits for the S&P 500 in 2025, and the dollar strength persists, will become more of a headwind for the equity market.
Is the Trump trade still a thing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we could see that in our latest Pulse survey, where the majority still expect U.S. exceptionalism to boost stocks and dollar. And that is based mostly, on Donald Trump's policies via growth,
okay, I got a minute.
lower regulation.
Great. But on January 21st, when the inauguration's over, then what?
Then we'll see what we probably saw today, right? With a lot of stories being leaked, and it moves the markets, and then comes Trump and denies it, and the markets move.
I got to go to somebody less important than you, but I'm sorry. Tatjana Dare, thank you so much. Macro strategist at Bloomberg. He's walked in from 64th Street, joining us now.
Third Avenue update. No change whatsoever. Just get the lanes of traffic that are blocked
Tom asked the head of the MTA this very question.
I know. I heard the answer.
He was working for you.
Just enforce the existing traffic regulations, and you could cut traffic by 75%.
Thank you. Do you look at your Easy Pass bill? Marty.
You'll notice I'm wearing a scarf. This also doubles as a noose when I do get my Easy Pass statement.
In honor, John, seriously, of your coverage of transportation in the Bloomberg 11th Real World, we thank you on this. Janno Lieber made very clear this historic day.
It is historic day.
It's an historic day.
Let me mark it on my
John
calendar.
Tucker, thank you so much. There's a lot coming up. Alex Steele, she's boning up on her Quebecois from Ottawa. Mr. Trudeau will be with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney here. Important comments here in less than an hour. The Dow up 230 points. Mr. Hendricks.
I can't get no relief. Businessman there to drink my wine. Plowman dig